4 years ago, when I was 17, my best friend Hannah, also 17, came over to my house for the weekend. I believe that it was Saturday night when it happened. We stayed up late, ate some junk food, watched movies. It was around 1 a.m. when I decided to take a shower and head to bed. After our horror movie marathon, I was pretty paranoid, so I asked Hannah to sit in the bathroom with me while I showered. So she did just that. She sat on the toilet and played some music on her cell phone, and we talked about whatever was going on in our lives while I showered. Finally, after my 20-minute shower, I got out and grabbed a towel. Hannah was still sitting on the toilet, and she said my name, so I turned to face her. That's when I noticed some movement from the bathroom window above her head. The style of window slightly distorted it, but I immediately knew what I was looking at. A face, a man's face, smirking at me on the other side of the glass. The man ducked out of view, and I quickly faced away, wrapping my towel around me. I whispered to Hannah that there was a man looking through the window, and she laughed, thinking I was messing with her. She bravely stands up, and to her horror, becomes face to face with a creep, staring, smirking. We run out of the bathroom to wake up my parents, but the creepy dude was already gone by the time my dad got outside. Next day, my parents investigate outside the window. There was a cinder block underneath it that the man had been standing on, indicating that this probably wasn't the first time he peeped on me. Then there was something stuck between the block and the wall. A bottle of lotion. The window clean was useless. You could see everything inside of the bathroom clearly from the outside. We didn't know this at the time. I still can't shower without that window being covered up. When I was around 7 years old, my parents rented out our basement to a young couple, a man and a woman. Things went smoothly for the first couple of months, for the most part, other than the occasional loud partying here and there. They were nice enough, and would leave their door open, which was underneath the back porch, for my siblings and I, the youngest being 5 and oldest being 9, to wander in and out and use their basketballs, badminton rackets, etc. whenever they were home. They would let us come and go as we pleased, although we didn't do it that often, as our parents weren't very comfortable with the idea, of course. As time went on, they started to get a bit out of hand, throwing loud parties all hours of the night and disturbing the neighbors, sketchy people coming in and out, and my parents suspected that they were growing marijuana in the basement, as the house constantly smelled like weed all throughout. My parents did end up finding a plant being grown in the closet under a lamp and evicted them immediately. Marijuana was illegal at the time. A few years went by until a family member who works in corrections came over one day. They began talking to my mom about the former tenants and asked if they knew where they had ended up, and she said she didn't know. The family member told us that the man was brought into the facility that they worked at, who looked and sounded familiar, but they weren't able to place him. They suspected that the man may be our ex-tenant, who was actually being held on charges of sexual assault and murder, but they weren't sure if it was him or not. Eventually, my mom was able to confirm the identity of the man as being our ex-tenant. He was arrested for raping and murdering his ex-girlfriend with his father. My parents didn't tell us that until years later, but it was pretty wild news considering how many times he invited my siblings and I, without hesitation, into their basement whenever we were playing in the yard. I was home alone in my previous apartment. It was a not so great neighborhood. My apartment was on ground level, and my bedroom window faced the back alley. A dumpster sat less than 2 car lengths away, where homeless people often rummaged. Just before dawn one morning, I heard a tapping on my window. My back was to the window, and my eyes were now wide open. It was still dark outside. I sleep with my lamp on, and my worn-out vertical blinds were missing a few slats, causing a 6-inch gap. So I knew whoever, or whatever the source of the tapping, could see me laying in bed, plain as day. The tapping was brief, maybe 5 or 6 taps, so I spent the next 5 or 6 seconds frozen, bizarrely trying to convince myself that it was something, anything else than a person watching me and tapping on my window, maybe an animal. Then came more tapping. Now I was faced with a terrible reality that someone had been watching me through the window in the dark for God knows how long. And he decided to tap on the window. had one of the homeless people became aggressive during the dumpster dive, something told me that nothing good could come from me turning around and looking out the window. If he got me to look at him, what then? Remember, my back was to the guy, so I slowly, rubbing my eyes and pretending that I was too groggy to hear him, I stood up and hazily made my way out of the bedroom as though I was going to the restroom or something. Once I was out of sight, I ran to the phone to dial 911, considering whether to forget any embarrassment of being in my t-shirt and underwear and bowled out of my front door, which was out of sight of the intruder. I wasn't sure if I could outrun whoever was there, or whether anyone would help me if I couldn't. Before I could make that decision, I heard a loud pop of my window being pried open. I thought my heart would jump out of my chest. At the same time, I could hear my upstairs neighbor Mike descending his stairs. I opened my door a few inches and peek out and ask him for his help. Mike was a big guy, and I heard he was trained in martial arts of some sort. He didn't hesitate to respond, hustling to the back of the apartment to see what was going on. Within a few seconds, I heard rumbling and someone being thrown against the wall and into the bushes. A few minutes later, Mike came around to the front door, telling me not to worry about seeing this guy ever again. He had beaten him up pretty badly. I wanted to believe Mike that would-be intruder was maybe dumpster diving, but that he would hopefully never venture this way again. But according to Mike, it wasn't a homeless person. When the guy escaped, he ran to the front of the building, hopped into a red sports car and sped off. My neighborhood wasn't a red sports car kind of place. The police later told me that the intruder was likely someone who'd seen me out somewhere and followed me home to find out where I lived. So Mr. Window Tapper, I still wonder what you would have done if you had gotten inside before Mike caught you. I wonder if you still follow me, and because of that, I often find myself wishing that Mike had put an end to you. If you found out where I now live, let's never meet. My dad's job requires him to go inside people's houses. He's been in 1,000 apartments and houses, so I asked him what the weirdest or creepiest thing he had ever experienced. My dad arrived early to an apartment complex around 7 a.m. because he had to go through every apartment, doing some maintenance starting from the basement. He entered a laundry room located in the basement, where a man, around 50-ish, wearing a nice white shirt with a tie, suit pants, but no shoes, green tarp in his hands. He thought it was kind of weird, but just ignored it, since it was none of his business. Later that day, he left to take a break at a local coffee shop, and when he came back to work, there were police cars surrounding the area. Out of curiosity, he asked one of the officers what was going on, and it turns out a homicide was committed. My dad then asked if what he saw was related to the crime, and oh, it was. After the police interrogation, they told him that the man without the shoes stabbed his mother to death in his bathtub, wrapped her in a tarp, and drug her outside. The police caught him dragging his mother into the backyard. Of course, they didn't let my dad do his job in the murderer's apartment until after a proper investigation. A while goes by and my dad gets to go and finish what he was doing. He felt really uncomfortable doing plumbing and other maintenance in that house where someone had just got brutally murdered, especially in the bathroom where the bathtub was full of dry blood. A few years back when I was 19, I had just gotten my first apartment in the basement of an apartment complex. That might sound odd, but a friend's mother talked to the apartment's landlord into finding me a cheap place to live. This was Denver, so it wasn't cheap for a one-bedroom apartment. The basement apartment was a studio located on the base of a flight of stairs. It was the only apartment at the bottom of these stairs, between the apartment's boiler room and laundry area, and even further down a brick hallway with a screen door and a landing before you finally got to my apartment door. The first few months living there was fine. There was a smoking area up the flight of stairs that led to my apartment. One day I was up there having a cigarette when a Native American man sat next to me and also started smoking. He was a resident in the apartment. His name was John. John seemed mostly normal, maybe a little bit lonely. but nothing unnerving. He said he lived alone and that he was an artist. We chatted until my cigarette was through. I said goodbye to John and went back downstairs. I would see John occasionally, smoking, as I was going to or coming back from work. He always said hi and never gave off any red flags, which makes this even more creepy. One night when I was asleep, I woke up to the sound of the doorknob to my apartment jiggling. It was like someone was frantically trying to break the lock. I got out of bed immediately, grabbed a knife from the kitchen. If this had been a normal room, someone would have heard the doorknob rattling. But my apartment was so secluded. I stood right next to the door that was jiggling and said, "Hello, who's there?" No one answered. I looked through the peephole, but it was too dark to see. I said in a loud, confident voice, "If you come in here, I will kill you." And I was serious about that too. Back then I was pretty fearless and in not a great mental state. The jiggling immediately stopped. Whoever it was booked it back through the screen door, down the hallway, and up the dark flight of stairs. I don't know if they thought I was asleep until then or what, but I think I scared them. I could see the dark outline go by the stairs through the peephole, but could not make out the person's features. I made a mistake that night when I decided not to call the cops. I felt like it would be a hassle, and that it was probably just a drunk person causing mischief. My heart was pounding from the adrenaline, but I felt confident I could take care of myself, and mostly put the incident out of mind. About a week later, late at night, around 2 a.m., I woke up and realized that the door to my apartment was wide open. I was in shock and couldn't really process what I was looking at. I walked towards the door, wondering how someone could have came in and just left, making no sounds. I remember my heart was beating furiously, and it was difficult to breathe. Every footstep felt like I was walking further into a fatal danger zone. I examined the door, and the doorknob had been completely removed. I don't know how he broke the doorknob without waking me up. Maybe he used a knife to carve it out. Maybe it wasn't fastened securely in the first place and just popped off, but it was pretty sturdy when he jiggled it the first time. I'm a fairly light sleeper, and I just don't understand how he could have done that. It still bothers me to this day. There was a clean hole where the doorknob was, and the doorknob was gone. I never found it. The kitchen knife that I threatened an intruder with the week before was laying on the ground next to my bed. Maybe I got up and put it next to me in my sleep. I don't know. It's a mystery to me, and that's one of the reasons why this occurrence still bothers me so much. I just can't figure it out. This person had been in my room, possibly watching me sleep, and they just left without doing anything. I'm lucky, I guess, but I'll never really know why. I bought a deadbolt for the door, and the doorknob was replaced. Since people will probably ask, I didn't call the cops. Like I said, I was in a bad mental state and didn't really have a lot of energy to care about myself, but that's besides the point. I was really on edge for the next few weeks, but nothing happened again. Until a few weeks later, when the guy tried to break in broad daylight. He was doing his doorknob jiggling routine again, and I saw, this time, it was John, completely drunk. I know because I yelled at him. He scurried drunkenly back up the stairs like he did the first time. He apparently was known for having a drinking problem. After that time, the entire complex knew what he had done, and the owner of the building urged me to press charges, and, I believe, evicted John. I didn't press charges, however, and I moved shortly after. To set the tone, I always hated the town I lived in. I moved there alone when I was 18 for college, and I quickly regretted it. It was a decent-sized town, but full of non-decent people. Nearly every gas station was robbed frequently. There were shootings in broad daylight, robberies, you name it. Well, for the first 3 years I lived with a roommate on a side town that wasn't awful, but it was sketchy. So when I started making decent enough money, I moved out on my own. The house was teeny, maybe 500 square feet if that. Super old and poorly built. It was just me living there, so I didn't mind how small it was. But what originally sold me was that it was in the middle of nowhere. It was surrounded by a bunch of fields, some wooded areas, and only a few houses nearby. Considering I hated being in town due to the constant paranoia of getting mugged or shot, I loved the idea of living out there. So at the beginning of July, I moved in. Everything seemed super swell, minus not being able to get good internet. A month goes by and everything is still swell to me, and I decided to get a dog to keep me company. He also loved the place, and spent long amounts of time lounging in the yard, trying to convince the nearest neighbor to walk over and pet him. Important later. Roughly 2 months of living there, I started to notice things out of place. Something to note is that an old roommate of mine was using the spare room for storage until he got moved himself, so he had a key but was never there. He just kind of popped in every other week to grab something and usually let me know beforehand. I'd come home to my kitchen chair being pulled away from my table, or a bowl in the sink, things like that. They were such small things that I wrote it off as my ex-roommate swinging by, or just stuff that I was forgetting. But then, my dog developed this crazy bad separation anxiety. Up until now, he didn't care when I left. He just lay on the couch and chew on his toys. He never barked, never did anything weird. However, all of a sudden he began acting really awful every time I tried to leave. He would literally cram his body through the door as I was closing it, screaming and barking, and wouldn't stop until I came back in the house. He didn't want me to leave him there alone, at all. I couldn't afford a kennel for him yet, so I decided one day to put a movie on while I was out, thinking maybe the sounds of people might keep him calm. I only had to finish one task at work, and knew I'd be home early, so I put a copy of Hamlet. I know, boring. But I chose it because the copy I have is 5 hours long, and I knew it would be playing when I came back. Fast forward 3 hours, long before Hamlet should have been over. But when I walked into the door, not only was the movie not playing, but the Xbox and TV were completely off. I immediately called my roommate and asked if he had been over, and he wasn't even in town. I explained the TV situation to him, and he shrugged it off, as the TV powering sometimes shut us off when it idles for a while. Even if that was true, there were several reasons I know this isn't the case. It wasn't idling. A 5-hour movie was supposed to be playing. Even if it had shut off, my Xbox wouldn't have. I had left it on by accident for weeks when I was out of town once, and it was still on when I came home, but it was completely powered down this time. The weirdest thing was none of my stuff was missing, and the door was locked when I entered. I eventually convinced myself that it was something weird with my Xbox or whatever, and shrugged it off. This was until my dog started acting weirder. Remember when I mentioned that I used to play with a neighbor? Well, all of a sudden, if she walked by the house while he was out, he'd start yelping and running at me away from her. This was incredibly weird of him, and made me incredibly cautious of her. I put some cheap alarms on my door, the kind that go off when the door is open, and slept with my pistol handy. The second night that the alarms were on my doors, I was woken up by one of the back doors going off. I flew out of bed with my pistol, trying to convince myself that I was about to shoot an intruder, but once I got to the door, it was shut and there was no one there. The alarm had been knocked all the way across the room. The door would have had to been opened for it to be chucked like that. It couldn't have fallen off and landed there. Something else was weird. The door was locked, but not the way I had locked it. I had always locked the knob and the deadbolt, but upon checking my lock, only the doorknob was locked. The police couldn't do much, as I had no witnesses, no lead, and they didn't have much to go on. Needless to say, I changed my locks. I didn't have any noticeable problems after that, but later, I found out that the close neighbor that my dog hated previously lived in the house I was renting, and the locks had never been changed. I had no way to prove my theory, but it's pretty obvious that she had a key and was coming and going as she pleased. Why though I can't figure out. Nothing of mine was missing. The most unsettling part for me was, she had tried to come in at night until the alarm went off. How many times has she been in my house at night while I was asleep? The This happened a few years ago, while me and my brother were still both living at home. There had been a rash of break-ins in my area in the weeks leading up to it, and several of my neighbors had been broken into. My mom had been at work all day. It was around 8:30, the time she normally arrived back. I was in the kitchen, my brother was in the living room, on an exercise machine. I heard the familiar sound of the front door opening, then closing, and assumed my mom was back. I waited in the kitchen for the door from the hall to open, and for her to call out. Neither happened. There were no familiar sounds. When a minute went by, I went out to check, and found that no one was there, and her car was not in the driveway. I assumed that my mom had arrived home, and then immediately gone back out for some reason. This had happened before. My brother, who also heard the sound, thought the same thing. Over the next half hour, I found myself thinking, imagine if it turns out that it wasn't her, and an intruder had literally been meters away from me, on the other side of the hall door. Fast forward to 9 p.m. My mom arrives home, and of course, it hadn't been her the first time. All three of us collectively freaked out when we realized that while my brother and I had heard the door open and close, indicating that someone had entered the house, we hadn't heard them leave. A search of the house revealed that we were panicking over nothing. No one was there. Our theory is that the intruder opened the door and maybe stepped in halfway, and heard my brother on the exercise machine, and left once he realized that the house wasn't empty. We filed a police report and got a locksmith in, who told us that the front door had been installed back in my grandparents' day and was hilariously ineffective, and anyone with the slightest burglary experience could waltz into the house whenever they wanted. Apparently, you could almost open this thing without tools. That's how easy it was. Needless to say, we got all of the exterior doors, locks changed, bought an alarm system, and basically sealed it up like Fort Knox. The creepiest element of this became clear only in hindsight. See, the days immediately prior to the break-in, there had been a number of odd incidents. I thought I heard someone trying the back door handle late at night, and our dog freaked out for no apparent reason. We had also found a cigarette butt on our front doorstep, and none of us smoked. We think the house had been cased. Whoever did it might have missed me and my brother's presence, and concluded that the house's only occupant was a single woman who worked long hours. To this day, I'm glad I didn't open the hall door and meet them face to face. About 2 years ago, I was long distance dating a guy who was my first love. He loved me too, but unfortunately due to the long distance and his addiction problems, we had to break it off. As most people act when their first relationship or love ends, they enter weeks of depression or denial. I had trouble sleeping for at least a month. This caused me to be late to work almost every day, and as a result, I received a warning that if I didn't fix my attendance issue, then I would be let go. I immediately forced myself to try to occupy my time with my freelance illustrations, and really attempted to go to bed early. The first couple of days it was rough, but I kept at it. The first night that I remember getting work done and sleeping on time was the night it happened. Quick backstory, my roommate and I lived in a house, separated into 2 living spaces. One of our friends rented the upstairs. I figured I should only mention this because our windows, for example, were very accessible and unfortunately didn't have locks. We also had a backyard that was fenced off, but like the windows, the fence door was also lock-free. Now to what happened. I was asleep, but due to being a light sleeper and being incredibly heartbroken, I easily awoke to lights coming through the blinds of my bedroom window. Luckily, my bed was adjacent to the window, so they didn't see me. I was still a little foggy from being sleep deprived, and also from the melatonin, but forced myself to wake up when whispering voices came from the people holding the flashlights. There were at least 3 of them. It was such a blur that I could only really remember that detail. They were wearing black and began to move to the fence of our backyard. I immediately began to feel so emotional at being woken up, and my body went into autopilot. I grabbed my phone and box cutter. I worked at Trader Joe's, and we used one of those every day. I then woke up my roommate. I dialed 911 and handed him the phone and told him to tell the operator that people were trying to break in. My amazing roommate seemed to understand immediately, despite being shaken awake. I pounded my way to the kitchen, where we had a huge window looking into our backyard. My adrenaline pumped as I saw a stranger make his way through the fence, their flashlights bobbing around. It was that moment that triggered me into a fit of tears. Not the cute one-drop tears on your cheeks, but the type where a river of tears come down your face, making it difficult to see. I mean, the boyfriend who I loved left me. I haven't been able to sleep. The job was threatening to fire me, and now these assholes woke me up and were trying to take what little I had. They began to look through the window of the back shed, which like an idiot we hadn't attached a padlock to. Inside was a bike that my dad had bought for me, and the bikes of my friends who lived upstairs, and an old TV. One of the intruders made their way to our back door, when in a fit of tears and anger, I beat him to it. I flicked our kitchen light on and swung the door open. The stranger was right in front of me and jumped backwards. I mean, to be fair, I was holding an incredibly sharp, extended box cutter, while crying really badly. I started yelling at them about being woken up and being depressed, and how dare they try to rob someone who was barely keeping it together. I was essentially yelling at no one after a couple of seconds, because they booked it as soon as I started to confront them. The police came, took our statements, and asked for a description, and said that they would look around. They never found anyone, probably because I never followed the strangers to see which way they had gotten to our place. If so, I could have got their license plate or something. It didn't occur to me afterwards that I should have told them that the police were coming, or worry that they might have hurt me, or more importantly, my roommate. Looking back, I feel really bad for risking our lives like that. I don't really know what came over me, but I was holding so much sadness and anger, and these people caused me to let it out. Anyway, that's what happened. I've learned a lot since then, like having our landlords install locks for our windows, and seeing a therapist. It may have worked out for me, but to anyone reading this, please don't be as stupid as me, especially when other lives are at stake. I should have just waited inside for the police, or yelled at them through the window, but I didn't. So yeah, if the people who tried to break into my home are reading this, I hope I never encounter you again, and I assume the feeling is mutual. This is going to be a long story with a slow build, with other details added for context, so be ready for that. There will be passing, vague references to child abuse, again for context. This being said, I have a deep-seated fear of windows. I've had thick curtains and blinds on all my windows which are closed completely, day or night. I currently live on the second floor, since I also hate being on the ground floor. And even now I can't handle even the tightest gap in the window. I'm a 27-year-old dude, but I have a pretty hefty PTSD, complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and bipolar disorder, both of which involve many fears and anxieties, including this. I could tell you stories about many of my fears, but this is a story of why I'm afraid of windows. I couldn't tell you the exact year that this happened, but it would have been in the late 90s, when I was a young boy, maybe 5 or 6. My parents were still together, and we lived in a bungalow, just a stone's throw away from Detroit. Literally, we lived right on the border. If you don't know, a bungalow is a small 2-story house, where the second floor is basically just a single room, my dad's bedroom. I slept on the ground floor, right next to the side entrance. All bungalows have a front entrance and a side entrance, the latter of which is generally used more since it's right along the driveway. This being the case, it was out of view and had a car sitting there, which could further obscure the potential burglar. We had several break-ins where I lived. Luckily, my parents were able to afford an alarm system, which triggered anytime someone tried to break in through the window. This happened 3 times I can remember, including this occasion. My bed was situated in the corner of the room, which was also the corner of the house. Directly in front of me, and to the left, was a window facing the backyard, which I couldn't see out of unless I got out of bed. To my right, and slightly behind, was a window right next to the side door. Both times the break-ins occurred previously, it had happened during the day when no one was home. This time was obviously different. Being that I have experienced a lot of intense bullying and an abusive father, I was a pretty scared little kid, and this pushed me over the edge. I say this just to help portray how terrifying this was for me. Anyway, here's what happened. I was maybe 5 or 6. It was late at night and I was awake. I never could get to sleep, and it was dead quiet. Then I heard it, a jiggle. The sound of the door handle being jiggled. I at first thought maybe one of my parents was up, but I realized I heard it from both inside the house and from outside, from the window. I froze. I knew it had to be one of my parents, it just had to be. Please let it be one of them, I thought. I listened carefully and could hear someone fidgeting with the lock, scuffling around anxiously, mumbling to themselves. I knew what was happening, but I remember my mom assuring that this sort of thing only happens during the day when no one was home, so I didn't need to worry. Well, now we were home, and I was seemingly the only one awake, so now I needed to worry. I thought about yelling, but I knew that they were right outside my window, and my blinds were open. I realized this, and looked at the light from the window on the wall across from me. Remember, I couldn't see the window itself, but I could see its outline. I saw a shadow, the outline of a head, followed by hands, like that thing people do when they're trying to look in a window. I was in the corner, and hoped he couldn't see me, but just to be safe I closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep. I still believed in God, so I laid there and prayed that he would go away and leave us alone, but he didn't. I lay there for what seemed like an eternity, but it was probably just a minute or two. I opened my eyes. I looked at the shadow on the wall and only saw a square of the moonlight. I was relieved, but still scared. I decided I would get up quietly and go tell my mom, who slept in the living room downstairs. I quickly sat up, took off the covers, and got up. That's when I saw him, really saw him. There's another window if you recall, which I couldn't see from my bed either, and it got less light coming from outside. So there wasn't really a shadow, but the blinds were open and I could see out, but only once I stood up to go to the door. I saw him in my peripheral vision. One half of me was screaming to not look and to just run. The other half refused to believe he was really there. When you're that young, you don't believe such things could really happen to you. But I had already lived with a monster, so I turned my head to face the window rather than run away. But I really wish I hadn't. His face was directly against the glass, almost frozen, like he was focusing, trying to see in. He was almost like a statue. Even then, I couldn't accept that it was real. I couldn't tell you how he looked, what color his hair was, what race he was. Hell, I don't even really know if it was a dude. The backyard was dark, but there was just enough light to see his outline and his eyes. I could see the whites of his eyes and a dark center seemingly peering directly into my soul. Although he didn't have his hands cupped and it was very dark, so I don't think he saw me. But maybe that's another lie I tell myself. Regardless, I could see him, nothing but a thin piece of glass between us. I pictured him breaking the glass and crawling in, grabbing me. I knew my parents wouldn't get up to get me in time, even with the alarm. Maybe this was an irrational thought, but try telling that to a small, scared boy who at the moment was too afraid to ask his dad for help and was too sad about a sick mom to even bother her, even under threat. I locked eyes with him for what felt like an eternity, but again, probably only for a few seconds. Then, he eventually moved away from the window. I snapped out of it for a little bit, and I decided I needed to go wake up my mom. I got on the ground and started to crawl, but I was terrified. I loved Barney the dinosaur, and at the time I grabbed my favorite stuffed Barney from the bed and took him with me. I crawled to my door, which was barely ajar. My mom would leave it open, with the hallway light on, but she'd often turn it off after she knew I was asleep, to save on electricity. We had a security system, yes, but we were still not a financially stable family. We weren't even really a family, but I digress. Anyway, I carefully opened the door to the hallway, but I could hear it again, the jiggling. It went on for longer this time. I carefully made my way through the hallway, still hearing the sound of him trying to get inside. I got to the couch where my mom was sleeping and gently shook her awake. She asked me what was wrong, and I put my hand over her mouth, shushing her. At the same time, I whispered, "Mommy, there's someone trying to get in." She listened carefully, and she heard the handle jiggling too. We had guns in the house, but the problem is only my dad knew how to get them and use them. He wouldn't let my mom near them. They were upstairs with him and in the basement, and both of us were too scared of him, even then, to wake him up. Instead, she grabbed me, hid me under her blanket. She took out a knife she always kept under her pillow, still does this to the day. After laying there terrified for what felt like hours, suddenly, the loud piercing sound of the alarm filled the house. We then, just seconds later, heard loud, fevered footsteps. My mom gripped me and the knife tightly as we waited to see which monster's footsteps we heard. Was it the one from the outside, or was it the one that we already lived with? For once, we were happy that it was the latter. My dad was a massive dude, and this worked in our favor for once, and he came downstairs with a handgun he slept with. By the time he had got to the door, the man was gone. My dad caught a glimpse of him sprinting out down the street. So there you have it. That's what happened. That's where my fear of windows comes from. And even though it was 20 years ago, when it's nighttime and I'm feeling particularly on edge, I check my windows to make sure they're properly covered. As I do so, I remember what could be on the other side of that window. I remember those eyes, and I can still see them clearly as I did that night. I had been living on my own with my boyfriend, Ashton, for almost 2 years now. I recently had a break-in while I was home, about a week ago. It was early in the morning, about 3 a.m., nighttime for most of you. My boyfriend works a night shift, so he wasn't home at the time that this happened. I was on my phone when I thought I heard someone coming up the stairs from outside. I was just about to close my eyes to go to sleep when I heard my front door being opened. I thought it was my boyfriend, so I called out his name, Ashton, to realize that this was a big mistake. Now, my house is a one-bedroom apartment, so there isn't really anywhere to hide, especially when I'm stuck in my room. My bedroom door doesn't have a doorknob on it because it broke, so it's kind of tricky for someone to get in. The only place I had to hide was behind my bed, behind a small wall that was still pretty visible. I grabbed a wood knife my boyfriend has on his side of the dresser and hid. I could hear someone trying to get into my bedroom. It was one of the most intense things that had ever happened in my life. I held my breath and was ready to start screaming and kicking and scaring whoever it was with a knife as much as I could so that my downstairs neighbors would hear me and would come upstairs or call the police. The door swung open and I saw a tall, thin man with a mask over his head and a black hoodie. He saw me and headed for me, but I tried to scream and tried to kick him in his knees. I ended up kicking him in the nuts, and he fell down immediately. He stood back up and ran to the front door. As soon as I saw the front door opened, and it was my boyfriend getting dropped off from his friend at work, I pushed him out of the house and immediately told him what was going on. And he told me to run downstairs to his buddy's car and to tell him what was going on and stay in the car with him. He took the knife from me and stayed in the front room. I ran outside to Josh's car and told him everything. He stayed in the parking lot and he called the police. But then we heard gunshots. Thank God my boyfriend didn't get shot, but the bullets went right into the door and nearly hit my boyfriend in the leg. If it wasn't for my boyfriend and his friend to come home early that night, I think I would have been dead. Last night, a friend of mine and I were walking home in my city. We were cutting from one of the main roads to another main road, but we were using the neighborhood between those two roads as a cut through. We rounded a super sharp corner and slammed on the brakes because a dude was literally just standing there. He comes running to the car, and it literally looked like a scene from a horror movie. He had blood on his t-shirt and his jaw was hanging. I don't even know if he asked, but the next thing I remember, he's in the back seat while we're hauling ass to the hospital, which just happens to be right next to my friend's apartment complex. On the way, he tried his best to explain what happened, but all I was able to make out was that he abandoned his car somewhere and that he had been shot in the face. We took him to the hospital, but we weren't able to go in or anything because of COVID-19, so I'm unsure of his current condition. This might not be a super creepy encounter, but it was insane, and I would never think that anything like that would happen. My adrenaline is still pumping 12 hours later. Update. Turns out that he had been buying weed from someone and got shot in the face by the person that also tried to rob him. Don't know if he got charged or if anyone else did, but he was a victim and was pretty chill for some dude who just got shot in the face. About 2 years ago, I used to work part-time at a popular pizza chain as a delivery driver. I had a full-time job during the day, so the shift at the pizza place would be from 6 p.m. to 12 p.m. I enjoyed the job for the fact that I made good money and it was easy, but I hated working at night because it was dangerous. One night we got a call 30 minutes before closing, and it was for delivery in the worst part of town. I was stuck taking the order, since the manager had sent the other drivers home early because it was a slow night. I hurriedly headed out to deliver the pizza. About 20 minutes later, my GPS said that I had arrived. I couldn't read the house numbers because it was pitch dark and none of the houses had the porch light on. As safety, I called the customer to ask if they could turn on their light. He didn't answer until the 6th ring. He tells me that his house has 2 trash bins next to the curb and that the light was broken so he couldn't turn it on. I started walking through the front yard to the front door when I see a man staring at me through the window. I yelled out hello to him, but no reaction. He doesn't even move or open the door. I'm getting goosebumps now, and I decide to turn around to go back to my car. I call the customer again to come get his pizza from my car. He tells me in a slow, creepy voice to ignore his roommate. He said that the door is unlocked if I could bring the pizza down to the basement because he rents the bottom floor. As I'm on the phone, I can make a small light out from the window. The man that was staring at me earlier was on the phone talking to me. I hung up and took off. By the time I got back to the restaurant, phones were turned over. Any complaints would have to wait till the next day. I'm not delivering to any basements, and I'm now taking your pizza home for dinner. Okay, so this just happened this morning, and my housemates and I are still pretty freaked out, so I thought I would share. This morning at 5 a.m., I was woken up when my roommate called out my name and told me quietly, "Oh my god, there's someone at the window." It was pitch black, so I assumed that she was seeing a weird shadow or something, but when I turned to face the window, I could see a clear outline of a male figure through the blinds, which we keep slanted open so the sunlight wakes us up in the morning. He was standing maybe a foot away from the window and was directly facing us. For some context, our room is on the ground floor and has one of those large windows that has Bundy bars. They call them this because Ted Bundy, who killed 2 women at an FSU sorority house after climbing through the window, and therefore have bars on the ground floor for bedroom windows in our sorority house. Our room was also on the side of the house, so it's not like someone could have just wandered there. To get to our bedroom window, you have to go around the walled-off patio and a thicket of vines and foliage, so you'd have to put some work into getting back there, which makes you think whatever this guy was doing was very deliberate and planned. I froze. I didn't know what to do. It was too dark to take a picture or make out any details that could identify the person, so I just kind of sat on my bed trying to process what was going on. It seemed like he was looking through the window into our room, but after a few seconds of watching him, my roommate noticed that he was holding a flashlight. To me, it looked like he was looking at the Bundy bars and where they met the wall to see how secure they were. The bars could be opened from the inside. Coincidentally, we just replaced them last semester, which is even scarier. After a few minutes, the guy went away. We told our house mom immediately and she called the police. Our house has security cameras at every entrance, and apparently it caught footage of him pacing back and forth. So he was there for a while. I'm still pretty shaken up, especially when I think about what his intentions were. and the times that this may have happened while we were still sleeping and had no idea. I'm worried that he'll return, especially since we're a sorority house that's a home to 24 young women. I just got back from a nighttime dog walk, and I'm a little sketched out. Me and my partner just recently got an 8-month-old border collie pup. We lived in a really safe, pretty small European city in a nice, quiet suburb area. I have not lived here long, and I'm not from this country, but the most disturbing events I've witnessed in this area are a few 16-year-olds having a party on a Friday night. From what I've been told, crime rates are very, very low here. There's a gravel trail that runs between a bunch of backyards, which is lined by trees and is completely dark at night. My partner and I have walked down this path at night a couple of times, and we've only ever saw one other person, another dog walker, with a bright head torch. There are a couple of small trails that cut across the gravel paths, one which leads up a small hill to our street. Tonight I was out walking my dog on my own. I had a glass of wine with dinner, and I guess I was feeling pretty ballsy. I decided to walk down one of the small trails, which cuts across the gravel path. It was about 8:30 p.m., although by this point, it was pretty pitch black. Despite feeling fairly confident about my choices, I was wondering if it was really such a good idea to cut across the dark paths for the sake of saving 5 minutes. I definitely wouldn't risk it in my home city. I decided to keep going, in hopes that my dog would attack the shit out of any creepy weirdos hiding in the darkness. As we walk down the trail, I see something glinting in the ditch to the left. As we get closer, it appears to be a silver metallic gym ball. I thought about how out of place this looked. No one ever dumps rubbish here, but I shrug it off and keep walking. All of a sudden, my pup lays down on her belly and refuses to move while staring straight ahead at the main gravel trail. If you've ever spent time with a border collie, you'll know the crouch I'm talking about. Now, my pup has recently taken to doing this whenever she sees either a person or an animal up ahead. We've been trying to stop her from lunging at passers and other dogs by getting her to lay down and wait until they've passed. She has taken to do this automatically without us commanding her. When it's a dog, she'll generally lay on her belly and try to commando roll towards them because she wants to say hello. When it's a person, she usually just lays there and waits. For a second, I think she's having to lay down in the grass. Then I realize that she won't move, even when I give her a tug on the leash. She's just staring straight ahead, like she does when she sees someone in the distance. I stop for a while and try to scan the path ahead. It's too dark to make out anything. We sometimes get deer wandering around here, but their eyes usually glint in the dark. I don't see anything or hear anything at all, just blackness and silence. I started to get a weird feeling in the pit of my stomach. Something told me to turn around and get the heck out of there as fast as I could. My dog quickly followed me, all the while looking back at whatever or whoever she was staring at. Usually she stops every few seconds to sniff something, but this time she hot-tailed it out of there. Was it just the wind? An animal? A creepy weirdo? I'm not 100% sure, but I can't help the feeling that my dog just saved me from a potentially sketchy situation. What do you think? When I was 10, my 2 older brothers and I drove home from a family friend's birthday party at night. Our parents were still at the party. My oldest brother, Michael, who was 17, dropped me and my other brother, Eric, 15, off to go inside so we didn't have to wait for him to park the car. As soon as Eric and I got inside our pitch black house, I heard a man grunt. We both went quiet. I was confused at how our dad got home before us since we had left him at the party. So I shouted out, "Dad?" Eric immediately looked down at me with the most terrified face I had ever seen and says, "You heard that too?" Eric played football and was relatively buff and a tougher guy, especially to my tiny 10-year-old self. I naturally relied on both of my older brothers to protect me, so seeing him absolutely frightened freaked me out big time. If he's scared, then it must be bad. We stared at each other for a moment before screaming and running out of the house without another word. We ran back outside and got into the car, where Michael still was, and told him what happened. "I'm sure it was nothing," he says. "Probably just something falling." He didn't really believe us. It definitely sounded like a voice to me and Eric. We lived in a very calm suburb, and all the neighbors were old. The road was not a main road, and the only other people that needed to drive through the neighborhood were residents. It definitely wasn't a road people who didn't live here drove through. Just as Michael tried to calm us down, a random car pulled up beside us, motioning us to roll down our windows. It was a man driving with two women who asked us where a well-known highway was. They had a thick, strange accent that sounded fake. Michael explained to them how to get to the highway. The strangers were completely confused and didn't seem to understand and kept asking for clarification. After they finally drove off, Michael said, "Well, that was weird. It's really hard to miss the highway, especially where they were coming from. Who doesn't know that highway anyway?" Now, all three of us began to panic. We realized that they were a distraction to stall us, to allow whoever was in the house to get out. The directions were simple. It should not have taken 5 minutes for them to understand. Also, this wasn't a place for people to get lost in. Of course, we called our parents, but they dismissed us. People get lost all the time, and we were just hearing things. They said that they'll be home from the party in a couple hours. So after a while, the three of us decided to go inside. My brothers grabbed their baseball bats, and I used the folded up mic stand. We slowly walked around the house, looking everywhere, under beds, in closets, and checking all of the doors. Nothing seemed to be out of place, and all the doors were locked, though I'm not sure if we checked the windows. Eventually we calmed down. When our parents got home, they thought we were just being dramatic. There's no way someone was in our house, and at least we're all safe now. So we just went to bed, and never spoke about it again. Okay, so this just happened. It's 12 a.m. Out in our backyard, we saw a few flashlights looking around our ponds. It was still for a while, then they started moving towards our house. I went to message my sister about this, and when I looked up, the lights were gone. I don't think it could have been a normal person looking for their dog or something. They would have no reason to shut off their lights as soon as they got close to our house. My dad went out with a flashlight, and I hope he scared them off. In the morning, we were going to try to see if we saw any footprints, but since it rained heavily today, the ground is very muddy. Update. Sorry for the delay. I've had my family coming up and was busy with them, but we checked around the backyard and the ponds, and we found nothing. Not a single footprint, which is weird because I swear that's where the lights were, and it was somewhat muddy. We're pretty confused, but the following night we had no problems. Didn't see the light again. I guess whoever it was got scared off by my dad. Finding no footprints is disconcerting though, but I don't know. I'll post an update if we see any activity like this again. Update, later that night. I just saw the lights again. This time it was 10:30. It was a little fainter this time, but it was more erratic. After looking at it for a few minutes, it went out. At this point, I'm not really sure what to believe it is. It disappeared as soon as I was getting my phone out to video it. I'll try to be faster next time. Okay, first let me say that I debated on posting this here, because I may be overreacting about a few weird things that have happened in the last couple of weeks here in my house. But then I decided to go ahead and post it anyways, and see what you all think about it. And please tell me if I'm overreacting. I won't be offended if anyone tells me that I'm being silly. First off, our house has a basement / crawl space that is only accessible from the outside through a door directly underneath the bedroom window and about 10 feet from the steps leading up to the back deck. It's a fairly large space, dirt floors and concrete walls, clean and plenty big enough for a grown man to stand up in. Until recently, it was half full of junk, most from our kitchen reno, like paint cans and equipment, and extra floor tiles and such, and had a padlock on it. We asked our yard guy to do some extra work that included cleaning it completely out, and when it was finally empty, we didn't bother putting the lock back on it. It had a sliding bolt that kept it closed, in addition with a little loop thingy that you put the padlock on. So we just slid the bolt and called it good. There was absolutely nothing in it, so there wasn't really a point of locking it. A couple weeks ago, my boyfriend was out on the back deck, emptying the recycling bin when he noticed the door was open. Someone would have had to open it. The sliding bolt was a bit rusty and wouldn't easily come open, and certainly wouldn't have opened on its own. We went to go check it out. Nobody there, still completely empty. He thinks, well, okay, someone was poking around and didn't find anything interesting, but he did tell me about it and reminded me to keep the doors locked when he wasn't home. A few days after that, I had the dog outside and he ran straight to the door. He started sniffing and scratching at it, and I noticed that it was slightly open again. I opened it, went inside and walked around. Nobody was there. Let me add that we have a lot of trees and wildlife on our property, including raccoons and groundhogs, in addition of tons of squirrels. We had one huge oak tree that overhangs the roof, covering the massive bedroom, so it's nothing unusual to hear squirrels and other animals on the roof with their little pattering feet and scratching sounds. Yesterday I was home alone, laying in bed, reading a book. The house was completely silent. Usually the dog would lay on the bed with me, but he was acting fidgety. He was pacing and just acting weird. I was hearing the usual late afternoon squirrels, or whatever was on the roof. But then I heard a noise that is clearly the crawlspace door creaking open. It's directly underneath the window to my right. So I stand up and creep over to the window. I crack the shades a teeny bit and peek out. I see a guy starting up the steps to my deck, just having exited the crawlspace. I immediately said fuck no, dropped the shades, and headed up the hall directly to the door he was heading to confront him. At the same moment my dog was nuts, barking and beating me to the door, but he was nowhere in sight when I got there. I only saw him through the window for a second, and I only saw him from the back as he was heading up the steps. He was wearing a ball cap, so I couldn't even have said what color his hair was. I'm guessing my dog scared him away, but what the fuck was he doing on my porch in the broad daylight, with someone obviously home? If he hadn't planned on knocking on the door. And no one would knock on that door anyway. People come to the front and knock, not walk all the way around the back, in the trees in the backyard. I waited a few minutes, then got my pepper spray out of my purse and went to investigate. Sure enough, the crawlspace door was open again. No one was inside. When my boyfriend got home, he put a padlock on it. Then he got my gun out of the safe, where it's been for years, and assisted me keeping it under the mattress, on my side of the bed. I agreed to that after he loaded it with a rat shot, because I don't think I could shoot a human being, not even in self-defense. And a rat shot won't do much more than scare someone away with the noise from the gunshot. He was highly pissed at me that I went by myself to check out the basement, but I'm more angry than frightened. I don't know if I'm overreacting, that just because someone had been inside the basement a few times, I automatically assumed it was the man I saw who was responsible and meant harm. I'm fairly certain he did come out of there though, because I definitely heard the door open just seconds before I saw him on the steps. With it locked up now though, if someone had been routinely in and out, that will stop. Like I said, I don't know if I'm freaking out over nothing. I'm keeping my doors locked just in case. I think it's happening. Like, not right now, but I think the creep might be hanging around. It's little things, but it makes me sound crazy. I've ignored them a lot when I first moved in here, thinking that it was just because I'd been through a lot and I was living alone and pregnant, then with a baby. The nights I became sure was when I heard someone trying to get in the back gate. I called the police and they were literally there in 2 minutes. Whoever it was must have heard them because I heard them run off. I was so impressed with the police response and I felt good about that, but anyway. I was awake using my phone one night. Being it was the summer, the noisy heater wasn't running and I didn't need a fan at that point. I could hear what sounded like someone was there, but like they approached the side of the house and walked away because I wasn't in that particular room. I went into the lounge room, which is made of like 75% creaky floorboards, and I felt like someone was there. And I tried to make it sound like I walked away to bed, and I crawled really silent like a cat, avoiding the creaky floorboards. I got to the window, which is covered by a curtain that's like a pull down, and I hadn't pulled it down fully. I approached it and looked out and saw a flash. I live on a pretty dark street, and the street lights a few doors down couldn't have emitted that at me, for lack of better words. I didn't call the police because I was a little inebriated and I was in absolute shock. But the thing is, there's been other things. I am sure I've heard someone tampering with my windows. I realized that when I sat up late with all the lights on, walking around, even though I listened out, nothing. But when I'm sitting around with my iPhone and laptop, no lights. It's not all the time, but occasionally I hear someone walking near the side of my house, and I'm pretty sure someone has tried to open the gate. The sound is unmistakable. I even purposely waited for the opportunities to compare the audible differences between footsteps on the pavement, out the front, at least 10 to 15 meters away, and when there was a closer noise. I'd listen to the way the activity sounded at the side of the property whenever tradespeople came. It used to be a transitional house, meaning a lot of people with problems lived there before me, including drugs and violence. A handful of people have knocked on my door looking for previous tenants up until about 12 months after I moved in. Apparently, one guy used to deal from the shed in the backyard. Maybe someone got out after being locked up for a while and thought maybe he was still there. One of the last tenant's exes tried to kill her and the kids in the house. It has a colorful history. I have no doubts that someone's hanging around, whether it's lost druggies, a weirdo, robber. While it's not in the worst area I've ever lived, fairly tame, it's still not the best street because of some of the other housing commissions. I've also got a feeling that I might know who it is, but until I get footage, I'm not going to say. I've noticed every now and again strangest behaviors and started thinking about things I've heard, seen. I don't know. It wouldn't be too far-fetched. And if I die, I don't think it's my kid's dad. I checked that already, by means he couldn't fabricate. I think about the things that I see. The late nights, the sounds of the gate, the smoke. Anyways, the plan is to get some surveillance, because writing this shit down ain't helpful. I've already got our room set up, so no one can get in. I'm gonna put something small inside that can just record the nights, so it's hard to see, and hopefully put an end to this. I've gotten to the point where I'm actually scared, but also scared to do the surveillance thing, and that's probably the main reason I haven't done anything about cameras. I'm scared to know what's behind the window. Thing is, I think I'm just typing because when I put my phone down, I'm gonna go to sleep. And I don't know, the world is a damn scary place for a lone woman and little boy. My first post on Let's Not Me, and this happened over a year ago. Our oldest son Caden was 3 at the time, and our youngest son Connor was about 5 months old. Still gives me the chills, and still makes me uncomfortable even walking by it. It was a January evening in Pennsylvania. It was dark outside with a couple inches of snow on the ground. We had just finished eating dinner, and I planned on giving our little one a bath. My husband drives a truck for work, so he isn't home often. It's me and my boys during the week. Caden was playing in the toy room that has a door leading to the side deck. A little detail, we have no light sensor on that porch light on the whole side of our house. At this time, we didn't use that deck at all, and only really used it to grill during the summer months. It's not close to the sidewalk, we're the next street over. Anyway, Caden was playing in the toy room, waiting for his turn to take a bath, while I brought Connor into the bathroom. We were just about done with his bath when I heard Caden's little feet running towards the bathroom. He stands in the doorway and says, "Mommy, there's a man looking in the side door. I think it's a mailman." My heart skipped a beat because 1. No mailman is coming at 7 p.m. 2. The side door, as he called it, was never used, especially not in the winter. 3. I didn't hear anyone knock. I began to sketch myself out more by thinking how there is no light on the deck, and this person would have to walk through the yard in the snow walked back the upstairs of the deck and go to the door when the front porch light was on and adjacent to the shoveled sidewalk. I took Connor out of the bath, put him in a towel in his little chair, and told Caden to sit with his brother and not to come out until I said it was okay. He was very confused but listened, just kept asking me what was wrong. I grabbed the biggest kitchen knife I could find, had 911 ready to call, and got my mama bear face on. When I walked to the sliding glass door, I shined a flashlight on my phone through the window of the door, at a distance while walking up to it, hopefully to scare anyone away. The worst thought with this as a mother is when I reached the handle I realized it was unlocked. Someone could have walked right in. I flung the door open and shined my light, held up the knife and yelled, "Hey!" in the most threatening voice a 5'4", 120-pound woman could make. There were footprints in the snow up to the deck stairs and back down going into the field in the woods behind our house. I slammed the door, thoroughly freaked out, and locked it. I called the police and waited for them in the bathroom with my boys. While I was in there, I asked Caden, "Do we know who the man was?" He said, "No, but he smiled and waved at me for a long time. Freaking haunts me still." I asked him what he was wearing. He told me that he had a hat that looked like a mailman's, and he wasn't wearing a coat. That's all I got out of him. The police officers came and searched my property with flashlights before coming inside. He asked me Caden questions, and then informed me that he not only saw footprints leading up the side of the deck, but to the outside door of our basement and kitchen window on the other side of the house as well. He suggested that we have someone come stay with us for the night, and they will continue to follow the footprints that were left in the snow back to the field and wood line. My father-in-law slept on the couch that night with his gun, being the closest relative to our house. My mother was a nervous wreck, and I got very little sleep that night, and never heard back from the police. Caden still mentions it from time to time randomly, and we got blackout curtains for that door. I still very much like to get better locks, just to be safe. My husband and my father think it might have been a man who saw me home alone while passing and wanted to hopefully sneak a peek. But why just stand there and watch my child and go around the whole back of the house, not by the front door or street? Hope to never see this creep's face, and I hope he never smiles or waves at my child again. I posted this as a reply to another Creepy Encounters post, but figured I would also post it as a standalone because there were some really interested responses to that one. I had an experience maybe a decade ago that had me shook for years. I was on my way to work and stopped to get gas. I worked at night and it was maybe 9 or 10 p.m. I walked into the gas station convenience store, and as I walked past the man, I had the most horrific sense of dread. As soon as I felt the fear-induced adrenaline rush began, he had turned and looked at me, and I swear, it was like time slowed down. He only looked straight at my face for a moment, never stopped turning his head, but I was so terrified that I turned and left immediately. I was so scared that I raced off and told everyone at work about this dude. When I try to think back on what it was about him that terrified me, I have no idea. I didn't recognize him. He was a totally normal looking dude, brown hair, brown eyes, white dude in jeans and a white t-shirt, but I was certain he was going to kill me in that instant. No idea why this happened, and I've read tons of shit online trying to figure it out. It's never happened again to me. So this happened around 2017 or 2018. I was in 8th grade and quite tall for my age, 5'9". A house was for sale in the neighborhood, and it filled pretty quickly since I lived next door to a school. Every day for a week, I saw someone stand in front of the house, and I assumed it was just the new neighbor. But one day I got off the bus and started walking down the street. It was winter in Canada, and they were like tents that you put on your car so it doesn't get snow on it, and obviously you can't see behind it. So when I was walking next to the one of the new neighbor, he was hidden behind it, and he just grabbed me by the arm and started trying to pull me inside. On quick reflexes, I hit him in the face with my keys, and then he let go of me. I got into my house as quickly as possible and called the police. He never got caught, and the police patrolled my neighborhood for a week after that. Also, he wasn't even the new neighbor. So let's not meet again. Okay, so this happened about 15 years ago, but to this day, I cannot live on the ground floor of a building. When I was 15, I was staying home at my mom's house for the weekend. My parents are divorced, so it was just me and her. It was about 12:30 in the morning, and I was just chilling in the living room watching TV while my mom was asleep. The living room had 2 windows that faced the front yard, and it often left the curtains open as the house sat pretty far back on the road. My mom's house was not in the best part of the town, but I always felt relatively safe there. While I was watching TV in my pajamas, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye from the window that was closest to me. It was about 4 feet away. I turned and looked out the window. There, a man's face staring right back at me, smiling with the most hideous grin I had ever seen. I was frozen, and for about 20 seconds just sitting there with my eyes locked on his. Suddenly, my panic set in, and I leaped off the sofa and tried to run to my mom. I slammed my leg right above my knee into the wooden coffee table and fell on the ground. My leg felt like jelly. I scrambled up and shouted for my mom. My mom came running in, half asleep, wondering what was wrong. I started stammering that someone was at the window watching me. Just as my mom started to realize what I was saying, we both heard someone attempting to open the front door. Me and my mom both stood still, thanking God that the door was double locked. But then when it stopped, my mother looked horribly grave and just whispered, "The back door." She turned and bolted through the house, scrambling to turn the deadbolt on the back door in the kitchen, and then backed away. She ran to her room and pulled a baseball bat from beneath her bed that I always knew she kept because she was a woman living alone. Frantically, she asked me to call the police, which I did. I was whispering to the operator that someone was trying to get into my house. We then saw a shadow approaching the back door quickly and trying desperately to open the door, kicking and grunting while they tried to get in. My mother shouted, "I have a bat and I'll fucking kill you if you try to get into this house. We've called the police and they're on their way." The person on the other side stopped and was still for about 30 seconds before turning and running away. My mom and I stood in the middle of the kitchen for the 20 minutes it took the police to get to us. The whole time, my mother had the bat raised and ready to strike. When the police finally came, they looked around the house. They found that the flowers outside the window were trampled on, and there were several cigarette butts on the ground outside the window where I had initially saw the man. No one in my house smokes, and the police assumed that he had been there for a while. They didn't find him and took my description, but we never heard anything else about it. My mom moved away from that house a year later, even though we never had another incident. I now live in another country with my husband, who wonders why I have no desire to own a house and love living in high-rise apartments. I also pay for state-of-the-art security and have a baseball bat in my closet, just like my mom. I have no idea what would have happened if my mother hadn't realized the back door was unlocked and hadn't beaten the man to it, or for some reason my mother wasn't there that night, as she often worked late. I don't know if the man thought he could overpower the 2 women alone, or if he was just trying to scare us. Whatever that man had intended, I pray he didn't find someone else who forgot to lock the back door. Allow me to set the stage for this. I was 19 at the time this took place. I was a Marine, and I was on my first deployment to Afghanistan. Not too far from my platoon's patrol base was a structure that looked like a castle. Though interpreted conversations with locals, we were able to determine that we believed it was built for Alexander the Great. Whether that's true or not, I'll never know, but let me tell you, this place looked ancient. So being in the Marines, we did the only thing we thought was prudent at the time. We went on a patrol with the intelligence of setting up an OP inside the structure. We took the Afghan border police with us. When we got close to the structure and our Afghans figured out what we were up to, they refused to go any further. Before they left, they kept on repeating the same word over and over. Don't ask me what it was. It was over a decade ago, and there's no way I can remember it. But what I do know now was that they were trying to warn us of evil spirits. We went in anyway, without our Afghans, with the intent of staying there overnight. This place was basically an ancient fort with mud and clay brick walls on all four sides, with a building in the middle. So we set up security, made sure we had comm checks with our patrol base, and they had an updated position report on us so they knew where we were, in case we got into trouble. Darkness fell. Not too long after, I went to take my turn on the wall with my friend to watch out for anyone that might be trying to sneak up on us and any other Taliban-related shenanigans. Not even 20 minutes into our shift, weird shit started going down. The entire time I was at the wall, I felt watched from all sides. I turned to see a figure walking along the wall, not far from where I was sitting. I saw it walking, but it was a robed figure that looked like it was almost floating. I turned to my friend to see if he saw it too, and he said he did, but when he got his night vision back on, the figure was gone. We didn't see anything else for the rest of our shift. We were uneasy and finished and went to rest, where I finally ended up dozing off at some point. I don't know what happened next, but I awoke to a completely black figure literally squatting on my chest. When I went to yell for help, nothing came out, and it felt like I had a hand over my mouth. I reached for my knife and felt like something was pinning my arm to the ground. I tried to squirm free, but couldn't move, so I bit down as hard as I could on what felt like a hand on my mouth. At this point, whatever weight was on me instantly disappeared and I could move and talk again. I was freaking out, and my brothers who were around saw me. My training kicked in, and I was trying my best to keep quiet and not pass out because I was hyperventilating. My squad mates calmed me down, and after telling them what happened, they all admitted to having creeps and feeling being watched the whole time they were there. None of us could sleep, and we all basically sat back to back for the rest of the night when we weren't on watch. We were pretty freaked out, so every noise or rustle of the wind made it even worse in the total silence of an ancient fort in that ancient desert. If you haven't experienced the silence of an open desert in a part of the world that there's absolutely zero light and zero noise pollution, then I suppose it would be hard to appreciate any noise in a place in the middle of the night in total darkness when you're already alert to sounds of the enemy, and now even more alert from something you can't understand. It's just about the scariest thing that anyone could ever experience. I will never experience that kind of fear again in my life, ever. To finish quickly, as soon as the sun came up, we left. Everyone was scared shitless, and none of us spoke about it again to each other. We never went back to that area again, and I still suffer from nightmares and sleep paralysis because of my personal experience that night. The scariest part of this whole thing is, I know it's probably just in my head. That's my, ghost story. If you stuck it out, thank you. I hope you enjoyed. First, we will need context. My old house was pretty pumped up on security. We had a finger ID, passcodes on the door, cameras everywhere, an automatic security system that would call the police or play a fake, the cops have been called, message. This story happened a few years back. My dad noticed a weird looking man, pretty covered up, lurking on the street just outside of our house. We thought nothing of it since sometimes you get an occasional drunk or high person wandering around your neighborhood. But this man started to inch up closer to our home, first being on the opposite side of the street, then before we knew it, being basically on our property. We just sort of watched him to see what he would do. I'm pretty sure we got bored and walked away, and just forgot. Then we started hearing strange noises coming from the downstairs, where our front door was. We decided to switch on the camera, and sure enough, this guy is banging on our door trying to get in, and then he looks through the window. He gave up, but then started to go around the side. There was a set of stairs that led into an upper area where we were. He starts to head upstairs, which sent my dad to go to the side of the house that the man was on with a knife and scream at him. The guy runs, and we don't see him again. That's the end, right? Wrong. The guy comes back later. I guess he saw the car was gone from the driveway. My dad had gone to get something, leaving me and my mom. We didn't want to confront the guy, so we had the idea of playing the fake cop alert that could be heard outside. So we played it, and as soon as the guy heard it, he ran. Never saw him again, and never want to. What makes this story creepier is on the news later, it showed a guy that had been lurking around houses and actually killed people, had just been arrested. It was the same man who was at our house. I'm going to share something that happened to me last night. So for a bit of background, I'm a 13-year-old male in the UK, and I have a Doberman that I normally take out in the back garden so she can do her business before bed. But this time was a lot different. I had opened the back door and she darted off into darkness, so nothing out of the ordinary, but when I called her back, she didn't show. I sat there for about 15 minutes waiting when I see something move in the distance. I brush it off, and that's when my dog just walks into the flat. When I walked in and shut the door, my blood ran cold as I heard the door handle jiggle. It had to be a person. It wasn't windy or anything. I flung myself against the door, and my dog started growling with her back hair standing straight up, breathing heavily. It was terrifying. I took off my slippers and held them in my hand so I wouldn't make a noise as I walked away from the door, and practically flung myself up the stairs. I must have fell asleep because later that night I woke up to the sound of faint cackles from outside, and I just laid there horrified. To whoever was on the outside of that door, let's never meet again. For a short period of my life, I lived in a car. Don't worry, my life is good now. When you live in a car, you pick up systems, ways to keep your car clean, places to shower for cheap, and most importantly, where to sleep. I'm mostly bounced from different Walmarts in the area. I live in the south, where there's tons to pick from. It's good to pick different parking lots, so you don't attract any attention for going to the same one every night. I always made a rule to sleep under the light in the parking lot. One night, the Walmart I picked didn't really have good spots in the light, so I figured I'd just sleep in whichever spot, in the back, and go to bed after a long day at work. As I woke up to the sun rising, I saw 2 handprints left by a stranger outside my window. This convinced me to always park under the light no matter what, and maybe avoid that specific Walmart. Honestly, I'm just happy whoever it was just looked at me and left me alone. All I had on me was pepper spray, and it wouldn't have worked out if I would have used it while I was in the car. So this happened a few months ago. I'm a sophomore in college and was traveling down to my hometown over break. I was having some relationship issues with my stepmom, so I didn't want to stay at my dad's house that night I arrived at my hometown. I phoned a friend of mine from high school to see if I could stay at his place. I knew from social media that he was still in town, and I've stayed at his place before, so I knew that there would be a place for me to stay. My friend, let's call him Z, seemed to be a pretty normal dude. We weren't best friends or anything, but he and I got pretty close by the time we graduated. We occasionally text or hung out if I was in town, and catch up, reminisce on the times we spent in the orchestra or in English class. When I called, he seemed extremely enthusiastic. Z's a normally upbeat guy, but this time it seemed like he was getting a brand new car. I didn't think about it at the time, and he said I could sleep in the guest room, so I headed over. When I got to his house, he was just as excited as he was on the phone. He was bringing up stuff to do, like getting high, and watching weird movies or playing video games. Z's parents weren't home, so he really wanted the opportunity to smoke. I was pretty tired from the drive, but since we rarely saw each other, I thought a little bit of bonding couldn't hurt. We played Smash Bros, smoked some weed, and just chatted for a few hours. It was longer than I wanted, but I was having fun, so whatever. By the time it was getting late, around 2 a.m., he started asking me some pretty weird questions. Questions like if I ever wondered what it's like to kill someone, or if I thought anyone would miss me if I was gone. This along with some pretty normal questions, like if I've ever had a boyfriend, or how my parents are doing, or if I'm making any friends at school, and this gave me a weird feeling. I was confused in the moment, but it didn't hit me until after that Z could be assessing me for something bad. The weirdness of it all made me want to go to bed. We stopped the game and both went into the basement where his room and the guest room was located. We say goodnight, I go in my room and get ready for bed. I'm having trouble sleeping, just insomnia that I've had for a while. So I stay awake for another hour until I hear some movement from outside my room. The walls were pretty thin, so I could hear footsteps walking past my door and up the stairs to the main floor, then back down quickly after. What struck me as odd was that I didn't hear the basement door open, which creaks when it does. The light didn't turn on, so I was confused what Z was doing. I heard him go back into his room, but I had this odd feeling. Just ever since I saw him last night, he seemed a lot different than he's ever been. I decided to look him up on social media and Google to see anything out of the ordinary. Everything seemed normal until I found his Tumblr, which linked to an inactive Twitter account that I found on my Twitter contact list. His Tumblr was, well, disturbing. There were graphic drawings of mutilated bodies of humans and animals, links to suspicious looking websites that I didn't dare click on, text posts, and stories about murdering, cannibalism, necrophilia, and torture. There were photos of guns, knives, axes, which after looking at closely, were definitely taken from his bedroom. The last post, around a week prior, which was a post from his account saying he wished he could find someone easy to kill, like a homeless person. I was immediately filled with dread. I knew he was going to do something. He must have gone upstairs to lock the door. I packed my things, luckily I packed lightly, and opened the small window at the top of the bedroom wall. I started desperately climbing through, and as I was pulling my legs through, he opened the door. It was dark, but the streetlights illuminated enough for me to see he was carrying something long and skinny, so probably a knife. He didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. I just turned around, hopped in my car, and drove off as fast as I could to my dad's house. I immediately blocked him everywhere and reported his Tumblr account, not before telling the police. They said they couldn't do anything, as the guns are registered under his dad's name, and he hasn't actually done anything yet. Nevertheless, I told all my other high school friends not to hang out with Z. Ever since then, I've been creeped out whenever I meet new people. Just realizing that someone I knew so well could underneath be a person that wanted to hurt me so bad, who could kill me. I don't know what you're doing now, Z. I'm not sure I want to know. I hope you're getting help. Anyways, let's not meet again. I was born and brought up in Delhi, but my family originally belongs to Bihar. All these experiences started when I first went to visit my grandparents, and because I was 2 or 3 years old, I don't remember the incident at all, but my parents and other villagers have told me about it many times. My grandparents' home was a 2-story building without railing, and I was playing on the roof besides my sister and my cousin, who were reading something. It was around 6 in the evening, and the sun hadn't set fully yet. My mother went downstairs to get something, leaving me with my elder sister, who was about 14 years older than me. Somehow, I fell off the roof. When my mother came back, she didn't find me, and within 2 or 3 minutes, the whole village was looking for me. After a few hours, someone found me under a tree that had a lot of thorns. They found me without any clothes, or without a single scratch on my body, laying there blindly as someone had just placed me there. I also want to mention that it wouldn't be possible for anyone to take me away without being noticed by someone, since the stairs are right in the middle of the house, and there were about 20 family members present in the house. After this, I was taken to a priest who said that someone or something is linked with me. When I visited my grandparents at the age of 13, I used to roam around the fields. While going home one late evening, I saw a beautiful girl, must have been about the same age, appearing out of nowhere. We talked for a bit and became friends. At the start, she would often meet me around a particular place, but after a few meetings, there was no fixed time or place, and she would appear out of thin air, especially when I was in a bad mood. I also want to mention that these meetings took place over a long period of time, as I used to visit my grandparents every year, but would only stay there about a week or so. As time passed, I kind of became addicted to her. I knew there was something odd about her, because whenever I used to ask her about her parents, or where she lives, or any personal questions, she would totally avoid the questions. Also, she used to wear the same white dress every time. When I asked her about it, she smiled and answered, saying that I used to like the dress very much, but I know very well that I never complimented her on her dress. When my grandfather died, we stopped to visit in the village, as my grandmother came to live with us. I didn't see her for a month, since I didn't have my usual trip to my grandparents, but I saw her here, in Delhi. At first I was very happy, and also shocked to see her. I must have been 18 at the time. When I came back home, I talked about her with my mom. My grandmother overheard us and was furious at first, because it wasn't allowed in the village for a boy and a girl to spend time alone in the late evenings. When I described how she looks, my grandma said that no one looks like that in the village. The village isn't a big one, and my grandmother spent over 60 years in that village, and she was very confident that the girl that I'm describing must have been from another village, but the nearest village to my village is about 5 kilometers, and it wouldn't have been possible or allowed for a girl to transfer that much distance all by herself in late evening. My grandmother and my mother were slightly worried, but they didn't say anything else, but they told me to invite the girl to the house the next day. The next day, when I met her, I asked her to come to my house. She answered in a very strange way, her voice still fresh in my head. She said with a smile, "Do you really want me to come with you to your house?" I was a bit startled by how she said it, and I muttered, "Not right now, but tomorrow." She agreed and left. I returned home and told my mother about it. The next day, I asked my mother to make something nice for my friend, and she smiled. I waited for her to come, but the time passed, and yet there's no sign of her. My mom said that she was going to pick up some clothes from the roof, and will come back quickly. Seconds later, she left, and the girl arrived. I asked her to come in and shouted for my mom and grandmother, who were upstairs. I asked her to wait as I ran towards the kitchen for cookies that my mom had made for us. After some time, she said that it was getting late and she had to leave, but I asked her to wait so that she could meet with my family. After about 10 minutes or so, she said it would soon be dark, and hence she would have to be going, and that she'll have to meet my mom some other time, and then left. I was furious with my mother, as she said that she would be back soon, and my friend waited over a half an hour just to meet her. As I was going to make my way towards the stairs, I saw her coming down. I yelled at her, asking her where she was and why she didn't come down when I called her. Looking confused, she said she didn't hear anything, and why did the girl leave so early? When I told her that we were waiting for her for half an hour, she surprisingly answered and said she was only gone for 5 to 10 minutes, at most. I thought she was making excuses and ran to my room. This was the first time my mother started to believe that something was wrong. After this, every time the girl used to meet me, other people would never be present due to various reasons. My mother was worried and decided to place a camera in my room, where most of the meetings used to take place. But surprisingly, the camera didn't catch anything. My parents thought that I might have some psychological problems, and consulted with a psychiatrist. Various tests were done, but the results came back normal. My grandmother, who was a very spiritual woman, asked my parents to take me back to the same priest who examined me in my childhood. This priest performed rituals and gave me a sort of a pendant-like thing and asked me never to remove it from my neck. As soon as I came back to Delhi, I felt sick. I was admitted to the hospital, but none of the doctors could determine the reason for my high fever. For 3 months, I was suffering from an unknown disease until one day my nephew, who was around 6 years at the time, came to visit me along with my parents. My brother-in-law said that the nephew was asking to see me, hence why he had to bring him. My brother-in-law and my mother went outside for some time. Meanwhile, my nephew came near me and snatched away the pendant and threw it out the window. I didn't understand why he did this, but before I could react, I saw her standing right behind him. after 3 months, still in that white dress, and I passed out. After some time, I woke up and found the doctors examining me. As the doctor left, my mother, nephew, and brother-in-law came into the room. My nephew was crying. He must have been scolded by his father for what he did. They were asking him why he threw the pendant away. Surprisingly, he said that an older girl than himself asked him to do it. We were all shocked, but surprisingly I wasn't sick anymore, and I was feeling normal within a week. I was discharged from the hospital. This incident freaked me out to an extent, but still whenever she used to meet me, I couldn't resist her. These meetings increased significantly when I went to Kota for studies with my cousin. Also, after my return from the hospital, my family members too started to see her and feel her. Mainly my mother, often feeling that someone had just entered into my room, but finding no one. Also, bad things started to happen to people that were mean to me, as a boy made fun of me for my glasses and said someone pushed him down the stairs the same day. Time passed, and one day my father called me, saying that he was coming to meet me, and that he also got a new pendant from the priest for me. That night, she said she wouldn't leave me this time, and no one could interfere. The next day I came back from classes. I had many missed calls from my mother. When I called her, I was shocked that my father had an accident while coming back from the railway station. Suddenly I remembered what she had said the previous night, and I gasped in sheer fear. That night, when she came to meet me, I was frightened a bit, but I told her that I didn't want to meet her anymore, and that she should leave. I can't remember anything after that. After that night, I never saw her again, and to this day, I've only seen her in a dream. The same dream every time, where we are sitting on a bench in front of a huge tree. She is wearing the same dress, and that's all I can remember from the dream. This happens every full moon, and whenever I'm feeling very sad, but I never saw her in person again. Also, I would like to mention that I've been in 2 major accidents, but escaped both times without injury. I have a story of something that terrified me as a young kid, and until today, I hadn't told anyone. When I was a kid, around 7 or 8, I picked up the habit of getting on the phone and listening in on phone calls of other people. My parents had just got one of those new cordless phones, and my sister and I were allowed to each have one in our rooms. I would occasionally listen to my sister's calls of gossip or my mom talking to her friends. Normally, I'd pick up right after the call was answered and would immediately mute the phone. Most of the time I became bored and would get right back to playing Nintendo 64. It was the excitement of no one knowing I was there that made it fun, at least until the night that I felt someone knew I was there, and that's when I stopped doing it. It was a weeknight during the summer, around midnight. I hadn't been able to sleep, so I was quietly playing video games in the dark with the sound off. The phone rang, and I immediately got excited. Who would be calling this late, and for what reason? I waited till the ringer stopped, and I immediately picked up the phone and muted it. I heard my dad saying, No, I think you have the wrong number. The guy responds, Nah man, let me talk to Chris. My dad kept insisting, You have the wrong number. No one lives here by that name. Please do not call back. My dad hangs up the phone, but I stay on. I then hear loud breathing for a couple seconds, followed by him saying, I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna fucking kill you. Then hung up. It's like he sensed that someone was still listening on the line. I never understood why originally normal sounding guy who was looking to talk to a friend would oddly say that on the phone and in that tone of voice. That night I didn't sleep, and I quickly turned off the TV so that it wouldn't shine through the window and draw attention. After this, I no longer picked up the phone to listen in. So creepy guy who called and told me that he was going to kill me. Let's never meet. Well, this isn't nearly as creepy as other stories on here, but it still freaks me out to this day. A little background. This happened my freshman year in high school, so about 4 or 5 years ago. I don't want to say that I wasn't well liked, but I guess you could say I pretty much flew under the radar. Hell, hardly anyone knew my actual name. It pretty much goes without saying that I hardly had any friends, so it couldn't have been one of them trying to play a prank on me. Anyway, it was probably around midnight when my phone started to ring. It was from a blocked number, which is creepy in its own right, so I let it ring and go to voicemail. I didn't expect the caller to leave a message, seeing that blocked and unknown callers usually don't, so I was pretty apprehensive to listening to it. Curiosity got the best of me, however, so I decided to go for it. I figured there was no harm in it. It was probably a wrong number, right? The instant I heard the voice, I felt a sense of fear that was entirely foreign to me. It was a male voice, a deep, gravelly voice that was seething with rage. It also seemed familiar, as if maybe I went to school with this person, but I couldn't place my finger on it. The voice not only addressed me by name, but also told me that they knew where I lived. They called me a snitch, telling me that I had gotten them expelled, and that snitches die. They threatened to come in my backyard while I was asleep and kill my dog, and then kill me. I thought about telling my parents about it, but I didn't want to anger whoever had called me. I never got another call like that again, and nothing ever happened. But damn, that scared the shit out of me. For some background information, about 2 years ago, I had to go to a psychiatric facility so that I could deal with my depression issues. At this time, I was a 14-year-old girl. I was in the hospital for 3 days when all of this started. The third day I was there, I woke up with an awful stomachache. I convinced the nurses to let me stay, and from activities, and sleep off the pain. So, I'm alone in the hospital, plus the staff, when the patient phone starts ringing. I run over to answer it, thinking it was my boyfriend calling, but instead, it's a man's voice that I didn't recognize.
Can I talk to Sandra?
I was the only patient there, so I said she wasn't here.
Alright, thanks. Who is this?
The voice sounded a lot like my friend's dad, who I had just met the night before during visiting hours. I told him my name, figuring he would recognize it.
What are you in for?
I told him it was personal. This started to raise some red flags for me, because I told my friend's dad why I was in there the night before.
Did you fight to get in here? Like, beat up any other girls?
I said no, and I was quickly becoming creeped out. It took a few more personal questions for me to realize that there's no Sandra at the hospital. I wasn't sure on everyone's names, but I definitely hadn't heard Sandra before. I really started becoming uncomfortable, and I told him I had to go, and that was that. Visiting hours come around, and there's a phone call for me. A man asked for me, saying it was my dad, but my dad was sitting right next to me. I explained that he had called earlier, and my dad was pissed. He went over to the phone and demanded to know who was calling. The man didn't say anything and hung up. After a couple more calls, for me by name, I told the hospital staff. They became very concerned and we weren't allowed to answer the phones for a while. Apparently, a convicted rapist has been calling the mental hospitals for years now, getting the names of the girls who answer the phone. He then uses whatever information he learns from the girls and calls back continuously, posing as their dads or boyfriend. Apparently, he tried to pick up patients a couple times. The weirdest part is, when you call the hospital, you have to know the birth date of the person that you're trying to reach, or the staff won't put the call through. So, he somehow knew a bunch of crazy teenage girls' info, and used it to prey on us when we least expected it. It definitely freaked me the fuck out, seeing as he should have been the one in the hospital. Several years ago, I was off school for summer break. I was about 16 at the time. My younger siblings were both at sleepaway camp. My parents both worked full time, and most of my friends were away. I ended up spending about a month alone at the house. Our phone system has always been a bit strange, since one of the phones has never worked. I didn't realize it, but my dad had replaced the faulty phone. I spent my time eating and reading, lazing around the house. I started to notice something a bit strange happening with the phones. The phone would ring, and I would pick up. Shortly after, the person on the other end would hang up. I didn't think anything of it, attributing it to strange phone system. Sometimes I would forget to pick up the phone and it would go straight to machine, which I would be able to hear, and there was never a message left. I didn't particularly find it odd because there were a good deal of normal calls as well. Now, one weekend, I ignored one or two calls. I was too lazy to get up and pick the phone up. I heard the machine answer, and no message was left. I assumed that if it was important, the person would have left a message. I was in my room, reading and listening to music, when I heard a creaking of the front door. I got up out of my room and walked out the long hallway towards the front door. I assumed the wind blew it open, but it was a sunny, beautiful day, and there's barely a breeze. Suddenly I froze. I heard the creaking of the floorboards, the wood in front of the door. Both parents were at work, and no one should be coming over. I mustered up the energy and shouted out, "Hello?" I listened intently, waiting for a few minutes, and peeked around the hallway. No one was there, but the front door was wide open. I hurried over and slammed it shut. A few hours later, my parents came home. I explained the front door, trying to justify it, telling them that it must have been my mind playing tricks on me. They responded by saying I should really be careful because there has been robberies in the neighborhood in the last few weeks during the day when the robbers had checked that no one was home. I asked how they confirmed that no one was home, and what my mom said still chills me. They simply call the houses to see if anyone would pick up. This story takes place in 2005, if I'm not mistaken. At the time I was still in college, but my hometown was just a short drive away, so I ended up working at my local library. This part is relevant because I believe the subject of the story obtained my info through these means. I've had a number of creepy encounters with people, mostly men, throughout my life. I'm a straight male, but my short stature and boyish looks tend to attract a certain subset of creeps, though not as much as women have to suffer. I can at least say I understand the psychological terror it can instill. The library seemed like an epicenter for creeps. Like this creepy dude who wanted to paint me in private, which is in itself another story for another day. So one morning during summer of that year, after a pretty heavy night of drinking with some friends, I get a call from an unknown number. It's the 2000s, so I wasn't one to ignore calls at that time. And it was coming in a ridiculous early time, so I worried it was something serious. Well, on the other end was this guy that sounded like he lacked confidence. You could hear the quivering in his voice. He asked if he could speak to, let's say, Charles. It was concerning some kind of business proposal. I told him he got the wrong number, but he kept on insisting that it was okay and he would talk to me instead. Since this happened so long ago, and I was certainly hungover, I can't remember the details of what came next, except it was very persistent, somewhat nonsensical, and very annoying, so I hung up after a little bit. A week or two would go by without incident, but one early morning, and another hangover one at that, another call from a different unknown number, same MO, asking for someone I didn't know about a deal or a home being sold. Whatever he could come up with. Again, I told him he got the wrong number, and this time promptly hung up on him after he went through his spiel that it was okay and he could talk to me instead. This started happening more frequently, seemingly at random, since he wasn't consistent with what day he would call, but it was always super early. I still don't know why I continued to pick up an unknown number, but even with the unsettling nature of the calls, I still wasn't 100% creeped out. Until one morning when I got another call. Same setup, except after I once again told him that he got the wrong number and I didn't want to hear about another proposal or what. He said in a rather creepy whisper,
"I want to see your nether regions."
I told him if he didn't stop, I was going to call the cops. I heard him stutter, and then he hung up himself. Never heard from him again. Now the reason why I think the library is relevant here is because the place is mostly run by elderly women. They were as sweet as can be, and I loved working for them, but they had a habit of trusting random weirdos with personal information about their staff. The creep who wanted to paint me, for example, learned my full name and what I was studying in school simply by asking one of them when they were stationed at my desk. I know it doesn't seem totally weird, but I felt like it was a breach of privacy. Especially after that same creep, knowing that I was immediately uncomfortable in his presence, began to come in and linger around me when I would be stationed at the checkout counter, including leaning in real close and breathing heavily onto me. Gross stuff like that. I wouldn't be surprised if the phone creep got my info the same way. If he and the painter weren't one and the same. So creepy morning phone call guy, let's not meet, and I'm very glad that we never have. This happened yesterday, and before anyone says this, yes, I know I'm stupid. I had just gotten home from work around 9 p.m. and I barely had time to take off my shoes when I get a phone call from some number I didn't recognize. I'm searching for new jobs, and I thought it might be one of those places that I was applying to, calling me back. I pick up the phone, and it's some guy who says he's with some kind of third-party detention center, which, as he explained, was for low-risk inmates, and were sent there when the local jails were busy or filled. That should have set off a nice red flag for me, but for whatever reason, it just made sense in my tired brain. I was getting ready to tell this guy that I wasn't interested in making a donation or anything like that, when he says, "This is," insert my full name. I confirm, and he says that they're holding my boyfriend at this center, saying my boyfriend's full name and giving me a dead description of him. I said, "What's going on, since my boyfriend is supposed to be at work right now?" And the guy on the other end provides an explanation. He says my boyfriend had struck a pregnant woman with his car on his way to work and was 4 times the legal limit for blood alcohol. He said the woman was in critical condition, and my boyfriend had a few broken ribs and broke his nose in the accident. I'm freaking out at this point and asked if I could speak to my boyfriend, which the man obliged. I was put on hold for a minute before my boyfriend picks up the line. This person on the other line was panicking, saying how it wasn't his fault and begged me not to tell his parents, again using my name. It didn't particularly sound like my boyfriend, but I figured it was because of his broken nose he supposedly had, and his tone really helped sell it, because it sounded so legitimate. The man from before comes back on the line before I can ask any questions and explains that they had to sedate my boyfriend since he began to panic and hyperventilate, which I was starting to relate to more and more by the second. The man on the other end tells me that I should come right away and that bail was set for $2,000, cash only. I stupidly tell him that I don't have that much and that maybe I have half of that. He tells me that it's fine, and that I could work something out with the front office once I got there, and to just bring what I have, seemingly like he's trying to calm me down. He's giving me the address, and I can barely hold a pen because my hands were shaking so badly, and I'm very poorly trying to hold back tears. All of a sudden the door opens, and my boyfriend walks in, completely looking normal, with no broken nose, but more than a little confused as to why I was crying. I'm still on the phone with a man and ask him what the fuck he thinks he's doing, telling him how my boyfriend just walked in, and the guy promptly hangs up. I tried calling back a few times, but it went directly to voicemail. I find out the power to the bar my boyfriend works at had gone out, so his boss sent him home early, and I've never been so grateful for a power outage. My boyfriend slept on the couch to keep watch, but unfortunately, I still couldn't sleep at night, so I decided to look up the name of the organization the man said he worked for. Big surprise, that turned up nothing. I then looked up the address he had given me on Google Maps, and see that it's some random abandoned strip mall in the middle of a sketchy area that was about an hour and a half out of town. What really freaked me out about this whole thing was, the guy knew my number, both me and my boyfriend's names, but it didn't sound like anyone I met before. I have no idea what would have been waiting for me there, but I'm counting my lucky stars right now. So to the guy who wanted to meet me for God knows what at a sketchy ass strip mall, let's not meet. This is my first post here, and I'd like to share something that happened to me when I was a kid. I was around 7 years old, and very close to my aunt and uncle that lived a few towns over. We had a house phone, and I was allowed to make calls to people that were in the address book. I would call them once a week, just to know how they were doing, and ask silly questions, like how was your day, how are your dogs, or when are you coming to visit? One day, I accidentally pressed the wrong number while dialing and called someone else. A lady answered the phone, and I started talking as if I was talking to my aunt. I guess as a kid, I didn't find much different in females' voices. I asked her how she was. She said she was okay, but asked what my name was because apparently my number appeared as unknown. I told her, Tia, this is Pineapple Yard. I'm using Mom's phone. Her voice changed, and she started talking to me like she knew me. Asked me questions about school, which I found odd because she knew I was homeschooled, which I corrected her and reminded her that I was homeschooled. This went for 3 days. Around the same time of day, she would call. I would run to the phone and answer. We would talk for around a half an hour. My mom would only allow me to make calls for less than 10 minutes because it was expensive. So I told my aunt to call back when she wanted to talk because we couldn't pay the calls. We got close, talking about her day, how she was a teacher. I told her about stuff I liked and never felt closer to her. Then one day, she asked me for my address. She said she had forgotten where I lived and wanted to take a visit. And that was a big red flag for me, as my uncle and aunt knew exactly where I lived. I got a bit scared and hung up. I started overthinking about weird stuff she had said to me, like if I had a boyfriend, or what was my favorite place to visit. Questions my aunt probably would not ask. Next time she called, I told her that she wasn't my Tia, and that we couldn't keep talking anymore, which she responded saying,
You're too friendly. It's sad we can't be friends anymore, but I know where to find you. We will see each other soon.
And then hung up. I got scared. I went looking for my mom and told her I called the wrong number and that I hoped she didn't ground me. She checked the number in the caller ID and then the address book. The phone number was different from my aunt's by one number. It was a private phone, so it didn't appear in the big regional phone book. She called back, but no one picked up. I never told my mom what happened, just that I called the wrong number once, which was true. So creepy lady from my childhood, let's not meet, ever. Good friends of mine and I went to college together and stayed in the same dorms. It wasn't uncommon for dorm phones to ring from drunk dialers or just plain misdials. The dorm phone number was very similar, and generally the person in the room would change from year to year. This particular friend of mine is athletic and is very good at the cold shoulder, so for the most part has never had any issues with creepers. She picks up the phone one night at 3 a.m. and there's a man on the other side of the phone. He identified himself by first name very readily. I think it was Joe. He asked for some other girl's name, and she informed him rather sleepily that he had the wrong number and no such girl lived there. He asked what her name is, and she gives it. He asked her the standard.
So what are you wearing?
She informs him, flannel PJs, and bids him a good night, thinking that that was the end of it. The next night, again about 3 a.m., the phone rings and he asks for her by name. She informs him that she's not interested in speaking with him and not to call again. However, he didn't stop. He keeps calling her night after night. This is particularly worrisome because the dorm phone numbers are formatted such that you have a good idea where the room is by the number, and vice versa. She spoke with a friend in the family who is a cop who agrees to chase the unit on the phone. Her relationship with her roommate isn't above cordial, so the roommate doesn't understand that the trace item needs to stay plugged in because this is a legitimate issue. Fast forward to winter break. She is spending time in my room, but needs to go grab something in her room. While in her room, for just those brief minutes, the phone rings. The call trace unit isn't plugged in. She is afraid that he's calling because he could see her room light from the street. At the time, I noticed a man walking through the hallway. Since that night, I've never known if that was someone caring for the dorms, doing a round, or if it was a creeper. Fortunately though, my friend no longer picks up that phone. She's still spooked by men who sound like Joe, and has never felt quite as safe as before. So this happened about 5 years ago, while I was 9 months pregnant. I was Christmas shopping at the mall, with my then 7 and 15-year-old daughters one Saturday night in a very safe city with very low crime rate. There was an Applebee's connected to the mall, and we ended our shopping pretty late, and the mall stores were starting to close. I took my kids to the connected Applebee's for a late dinner. We finished up eating about 10 p.m. and leave out the Applebee's entrance into the practically deserted parking lot with shopping bags in tow. As we got to the car, I was in the middle of maneuvering the shopping bags on my arms to find my keys, when a 50-ish-year-old crusty-looking guy starts walking up from somewhere in the parking lot with shaggy gray hair and a faded flannel shirt and old jeans. I noticed him briskly approaching when he was about 40 feet away, and he said, "This is a stick-up. Give me all your money." My blood ran cold, and I stared at him and shakily said, "What?" He then said he was just kidding and came and stood right next to my daughters, who were standing on the other side of the car waiting for me to unlock the car to let them in. He starts to make small talk with me and my girls. He's asking things like if we were being good for Santa, how old they were, if we got all our Christmas shopping done, what kind of things did we get. He didn't seem drunk, high, slow, or mentally challenged at all. He was very coherent and seemed sound of mind. Mind you, I was a heavily pregnant woman, alone with my 2 daughters in a mostly deserted parking lot at 10 o'clock at night, who was being approached by a stranger who came and stood right next to my kids, on the other side of the car just shooting the breeze, talking to me and my kids, with his hands in his pockets and occasionally looking over his shoulder. I didn't want to aggravate him, so I was politely conversing with him and trying to look calm and nonchalant, while trying to disguise my frantic hands digging inside my giant purse for my car keys. This exchange went on for a couple of minutes while he periodically kept looking over his shoulder. I was slightly panicking and trying to be polite to keep the situation from escalating. I felt like at any moment he could pull a knife or gun, rob me, and my kids were right next to him, away from their mother on the other side of the car. And I couldn't find my fucking car keys to get my kids into the car safely. He kept trying to engage them in conversation, and I could see my oldest daughter was a little weirded out. She kept glancing at me to gauge my assessment and reaction to the situation. Kids often tend to not recognize potential danger when they are with their parents, since they see us as their protectors. And being that he was only talking and acting friendly, I was doing my best to stay calm. They were oblivious to the alarming situation that we were all in, and being 9 months pregnant, and that I was no match for a grown man, especially if he was hiding a weapon on him. While still desperately digging for my keys, I tried politely to give him hints that the conversation was over by saying things like, "It was nice chatting with you, I gotta get these kids to bed, and it was nice meeting you," and tell my girls to say it was nice meeting him too. My polite attempts to get this guy to leave wasn't working because he kept sidestepping my attempts and asking them what their favorite subjects in school was. and how nice young ladies they were. My outgoing 7-year-old was completely oblivious to how not okay the situation was, because he was being friendly, and because the whole time she was with her mommy, so I'm safe, child mentality. So she started to talk about what she picked out for Daddy for Christmas, talking about kid stuff and asking if he knew what Minecraft was, and keeping this creep from leaving us by keeping him engaged in conversation. They didn't realize that I was becoming desperate to get them the hell out of there. Then, I suddenly felt the seeking feeling of dread when I realized I may have lost my keys in the mall, and that we were stuck outside with a strange man who kept looking over his shoulder and was showing no signs of walking away. I was thinking that he was waiting for the perfect moment to pounce. All he had to do was grab one of my girls and threaten their life, knowing that it would make me do whatever he wanted as long as he wouldn't hurt them. I started to feel my adrenaline spike, and my heart and stomach were doing flip-flops, and I felt like at any moment shit was gonna go down, as the gravity of realizing that there's no other people or witnesses around, and that we were totally alone with him at that moment. Odds were stacked against us, and that he has his chance. Then, he was all of a sudden like, "Okay, it was nice talking with you, see you later," and walked off in the same direction as to which he came from. It wasn't until then I found the car keys and unlocked my car. I told my kids to get in fast, and I got in too and locked the doors. Started the car and drove the hell out of there. My 15-year-old lightheartedly and jokingly said, "Okay, that was weird," and laughed. I was overwhelmed with relief, and then I was confused over what just happened. I thought to myself, why the hell would a guy of seemingly sound mind think it is totally acceptable to go out of his way and just approach a woman and her kids in a deserted parking lot late at night just to chit-chat? But being that nothing happened, I brushed it off and joked about it too. When we got home, my husband greeted us and asked how shopping went. I said it went well, and my 15-year-old told him what happened in the parking lot and how weird it was, and was kinda just joking about it. I started joking too, saying how I was mentally having a panic attack while trying to look calm, and I started making fun of myself, telling my husband how I was attempting to inconspicuously rummage through my purse to find my keys. My husband went completely white, and I acknowledged his horrified look of alarm and assured him that, albeit creepy, the guy just talked and eventually left on his own. Now, my father-in-law is a retired sheriff deputy, and my husband went through police academy training after graduating high school. He decided to go to business school instead of becoming a cop, and being that the knowledge he gained from that, plus growing up with a cop as a dad, I found out why my husband looked absolutely horrified when I told him the details. What my husband told me completely rattled me to the bone. My husband told me that he was 100% sure that the reason why the guy was hanging around us and chit-chatting was because he was waiting for me to unlock my car. And the reason why he was standing next to our kids was because once I unlocked the car and the kids started to get inside, he was most likely going to force himself into the car with my kids and hold a knife or gun to them to gain leverage on me to force me to cooperate, knowing that I wouldn't abandon my kids, which would force me to get in the car and then do whatever he wanted me to, which most likely would be to drive to a remote location to do God knows what. And being that he wasn't wearing a mask suggests that his intentions were to also leave no witnesses to identify him. I then remembered that he was positioned by the back passenger door where my 7-year-old was standing, waiting to get in. My husband then told me the most likely reason why the guy ended up leaving was because it took me so long to find my keys, and the longer it took, the more anxious and spooked it made him. The whole time I was desperate to find my car keys, which through some sort of divine intervention stayed hidden in my purse, thus saving us from potentially being abducted. Where I live, it was about 11 p.m. when this happened. I live in an apartment complex where all of the apartment entrances are outside, not in an indoor hallway. My living room couch is about 20 feet away from the front door. I was laying down on my couch, doing some studying when I hear the front door knob turn. It's super squeaky. The knob jiggles a few times. I thought it was my roommate, so I yelled towards the door to hold on so I could put my German Shepherd up so she wouldn't jump all over my roommate. A put the dog in my bedroom, and then went to the front door. I looked through the peephole, no one was there. I called my roommate, who I haven't seen in a couple months, which is because she was staying with her family out of state because of the pandemic. She said she's still out of state, so it wasn't her. My sister is across the country on vacation, so it wasn't her either. I called the night management to my apartment, and they said that they'll call security to have them come out just to scope things out, but security didn't answer their phone. The past few weeks I felt like someone has been watching me. My car was broken into, and they took everything, camping and photography gear, and my violin. Yes, I was stupid for leaving it in my car. There's also a bunch of people who sit out on their balconies and do nothing but stare. So it could be anyone, seeing that I live alone because my roommate is gone. I also have an assigned parking spot, so they know which car I drive. Not as creepy as some other stories on the subreddit, but it definitely spooked me out for a few months. When I was back in high school, I arrived at school earlier than most of the students and the staff. This particular day was rainy and the school was empty. I was walking down the main hallway towards the cafeteria. No one was around when suddenly a boy I only mildly recognized came from the nearby hall. This boy always sort of gave me the creeps, so I tried walking on the opposite side of the hall from him, but he walked straight towards me, smiling. That smile, it gave me chills. I knew if I could just get past him, I would be in the cafeteria where there would be other students, and I would be in the clear. He stopped a foot in front of me, way too close for comfort, and said hello. He could have reached out and touched me, but he didn't. I said hello and tried sidestepping him. He stepped in front of me again. We did this a couple times. I would try to step in one direction and he would block my path, and he was aware that I was trying to get past him. I glanced towards the balcony, then risked looking over my shoulder. No one was in sight. His words chilled me. No one is coming to save you. My brain went into panic mode and I froze up. What did I need saving from? What was he gonna do? He stepped towards me and I couldn't move. Finally, I hear a door close behind me. Steps down the hall as an administrator was walking towards us. As quickly as it started, it was over. I walked towards the adult, towards safety, and I was free. I did report him, but nothing ever came of it. Since he didn't touch me, the report acted more as a log, in case he did something similar in the future. It happened 8 years ago, during the summer. A little backstory there. I was at my mom's house, but she barely lived there anymore. She spent most of her time at her boyfriend's, and my sister was very often left alone. I was a student in another city, but I had came back to the house during the holidays. I was 19 and my sister was 16 at the time. Our house had 2 floors. The living room and the kitchen were on the first floor, then 3 bedrooms and a bathroom on the second floor. The kitchen and living room had glass window doors that opened on a large terrace. From the terrace, you could go into the backyard by some stairs. We didn't really use that ground floor, as it was pretty dark due to the small windows, and it was basically a garage and an office to do our homework. Like I said, it was summer, very hot. I had just discovered Game of Thrones, and I had 2 seasons to watch. Every morning, I took my laptop, made myself comfortable on the terrace, near the kitchen, and would watch an episode, or 10. My garden was surrounded by a U-shaped building, so you could see the terrace and my garden very well from the balconies. Some men were working there for a couple days now, and they were working there late, so I could often see them while I was watching the series in the evening. They were minding their own business, and so did I, so I didn't think much of it. One morning, I was sleeping in late, and my sister woke me up whispering, "Wake up, there's a man in the house." I was half naked because of the heat of the summer. I stood up, perfectly awake now, grabbed a shirt and went downstairs, practically running. I know this is a dumb thing to do, half naked, helpless young woman, but I am very protective over my little sister, and I didn't feel any fear to this point. I went to the kitchen, couldn't find a sharp knife, so I took a fork. Absurd, I know. I asked her where she saw him. She told me she was watching TV in the living room, and because the windows were open, she saw a man in the reflection standing just behind her. She jumped off the couch, finding herself in front of him. A tall man in his late 30s. She had no chance in a fight. The guy had one of his feet on the first step to the second floor, where I was sleeping. She shouted, "Who are you?" He just walked quietly back into the kitchen, where the door to the window was wide open, and took the stairs to the garden. As soon as I heard that, I ran to the backyard with my helpless weapon. I ran to the gate in the front of our garden, and went in the street looking for him. I'm sure if I found him, I would have not been so brave anymore, and would have probably peed myself. Suddenly, I realized my sister was still alone in the house, and maybe that fucker was there too. I went back to the kitchen, searched in the house, but thank God we were alone. This is when I saw my computer was missing. My sister told me that the guy didn't have anything in his hands when he left. That was the scariest part, because it meant either he was in the house for quite some time before, took the laptop and came back to do whatever the fuck he planned to do, or there was another person in there. I put some decent clothes on, took my sister to the police station nearby. I'm very angry with the policeman. She was a minor. She told them everything and described the guy with a lot of detail. They asked her, "Did you recognize him?" And she said yes, without a doubt. They said, "You know it's highly unlikely that we'll find him. You should be thankful that you and your sister hadn't been raped." Like she needed to be more frightened than she already was. They wrote up a report, and she was too shaken up, but couldn't recognize the man, even though she said the contrary multiple times. We never heard back from the police. We came back into the house. She was very scared, and I was very angry with the loss of my very expensive laptop. I needed it for school, and had tons of photos on it, and I was also angry at the attitude of the police officer. We both sat down on the terrace and talked about what happened, and how lucky we were that she had saw the man before he came upstairs. This is when I noticed the working men weren't working there anymore. From the streets, no one can ever know we have a backyard and another entry into the house. My sister told me that he was acting like he knew the house a bit. Maybe it was his first time and we didn't notice. I'm certain one of the men working on the neighbor's balcony, who has been watching me, was the person that broke in that morning. From that day on, we double locked our doors and slept in the same bedroom for weeks. I was 9 or 10 when this happened. My parents had just picked me up from softball practice, and I was pretty tired. Before getting home, my parents stopped at the grocery store to shop for dinner. Since I was tired, I asked to stay in the car and take a nap. They agreed and let me, since they would be fast. I quickly drifted off to sleep, laying in the back seat of our little car. At some point, I wake up, kinda groggily, but with a tinging sensation. A chill ran down my spine. At first I couldn't figure out why, because I was still half asleep and a little out of it. I sat up and just started to look around, but didn't find anything. Then I heard a tapping noise. There was no one around, but the tapping continued. In my half-awake state, I realized that the tapping sound was coming from behind me through the closed car window. I turned my head to see a creepy woman staring at me intensely. She was a methed out, high homeless lady. She was grinning at me with her yellow-brown, rotting teeth. The few she had left anyway. Her translucent, pale, yellowish skin was warped, stretched out, and burned in some places as if she passed out in the sun for too long. Her arms were very skinny and veiny, bruised and probably infected from the puncture marks running up and down both of her arms. Her skin looked a little bit green, and there was pus that was oozing out. Her nails were discolored, long, jagged, and broken. Dirty blonde hair was all over the place, badly cut and greasy. The most unnerving part though was that she was heavily pregnant, never mind that she was also barefoot, and also had white clothes on with dried vomit in the front, and obviously had pissed herself on more than one occasion. Her outfit, looking back, kinda reminded me of a cult-like uniform. Anyway, this woman freaked me out. Like, where did she come from? What did she want with me? And who knows how long she had been there, watching me sleep. I wish I would have done something, like honked the car horn, or started screaming. But the thing was, I was too scared. I couldn't do anything. Thank God the doors were locked, because she tried to open all the doors. I don't know what she was thinking or planning to do, but it was certainly unnerving. She got frustrated and pounded on the windows, making animal-like grunts, signaling her frustration at being unable to get into the car. Thank God, by some miracle, she eventually gave up and just wandered off. I told my parents what happened as soon as they came back. The lady was gone at this point. My parents got upset at me about what happened and just made me go shopping with them next time. Safe to say, years after, I've never ran into this woman again, and I hope to keep it that way. It was Christmas time. My wife and I were staying at our childhood home, where her mother now lived, all alone. Well, not if you include her cats. The house was on a quiet cul-de-sac in the suburbs. If you're picturing freshly mowed yards, American flags, and empty sidewalks, you're picturing it right. It was a single-story home that was attached to a garage out front. The garage had 2 doorways, apart from the electric garage door, of course. One that leads to the garden and backyard. This one had an old doggy door from the days with dear old Max that they covered with a piece of nailed wood. That had always made me slightly uncomfortable before, but I figured it had been that way for years, so what's the worst that could happen? The second door led into the kitchen. It could stop a mouse, but not much else. Definitely not something that wanted in, or someone. We were asleep in my wife's childhood bedroom. At the front of the house. It was 3 a.m. I was in that deep, dark recess of sleep. Then I heard it. The scream. "What are you doing?" It was my mother-in-law's voice echoing down the hallway. To me, lost in the sea of sleep, it sounded like a jet engine roaring past my eardrum. I bolted up. What happened next happened in a matter of seconds. But about that scream, even though I was dead asleep, I heard enough of it to sense the urgency behind it. It wasn't a, "oh, you scared me" type scream. This was different, and I knew it. I watch and read a fair amount of true crime, and this scream awakened that horrible fear. That one that says, "this can't be really happening to me, can it?" Honestly, in that second of the night, it sounded like someone was being murdered. You ever wonder if you're a fight or flight type of individual? I always have, and I came to know something about myself this night. I'm a fighter. I leaped out of bed, growled in the manliest voice I could muster. "I'm gonna kill you, motherfucker." I tore the bedroom door open and ran down the hallway. There, at the end, I saw my mother-in-law, nightgown on, a look of utter shock in her face, standing still. We make eye contact as I continue towards her. She turns her head and looks directly into the kitchen. I hurry past her and round the corner, into the kitchen. The hollow core door is obliterated, shards everywhere. I look through the open frame to see the electric garage door is open. I push ahead. As I run into the garage, I hear it. The sound of someone hopping into a car, just out of view. Just as I make it to the driveway, I see the car peeling out from the sidewalk adjacent to the house. But the adrenaline is still pumping, and who am I to say no to adrenaline? So like an idiot, I run barefoot after the car. But I'm no Michael Johnson, and even he couldn't have caught that speeding car. It soon vanishes down the street, and I'm left alone. The police showed up within 3 minutes, which, I have to say, makes me feel a lot more at ease with my mother-in-law living there now. They took our statements. My mother-in-law said that she heard noises, the hollow core door leading to the house being kicked in, and she walked into the kitchen where she encountered the burglar, a small-framed woman. The police theorized she was working as part of a team. Her job was to squeeze the doggy door, kick in the hollow core, and open the electric garage door for her accomplices. According to the police, the burglars most likely thought no one was home. Fortunately, my mother-in-law must have caught her off guard and scared her, in addition to my manly growl, of course. But it feels good to know everyone was safe, and to learn that I guess I've got a little fight in me. And for the record, we bought the heaviest goddamn wooden door you've ever seen to replace that hollow core. I would like to see a mouse try to get through that. We moved into a new house right after my 10th birthday. I'm the second oldest of 7, but at the time there was only 6 of us. When we moved in, my younger brother was incredibly scared of our basement. Every night before he went to bed, he would lock the basement door, and the back door that's in the kitchen, right next to each other. We were always making fun of him, like siblings do. After a couple years, I learned why. My next door neighbor ran a daycare. Our bus would stop about 4 blocks from my house, and we would walk with the daycare kids, and had to leave by 7:15. My dad had to be at work at 7 a.m., so he'd wake us up before he left. Our oldest sister stayed at a friend's house, so this particular morning, my brother Buddy and I were the only ones in the house. We got around and went to the kitchen to make our lunches for school. In the middle of making our lunch, we heard a knock. We both went to the back door and were thinking some kids were trying to scare us. We looked through the door windows and no one was there. After a minute, we went back to making our lunches. A couple minutes later, we heard a knock again. At this point, we felt uneasy. We both went to the back door, and still, no one was there. This time, we decided to wait. Suddenly, we heard it again. We realized it wasn't the back door, it was the basement door. We both turned to our right, looking directly at the basement door, when it started shaking. Someone was trying to open that door, and when they couldn't, they started pounding on it very aggressively. We screamed and ran to our mother's room. We woke up my mom, and she comes downstairs, angrily, for waking her up. We waited at the top of the stairs for her to check out the basement. She went down there for a few minutes and called us down. There was nothing, and no one. There was no other way out. The only door was the basement door from the kitchen. Since the door was locked, we knew if it was a person, they would have been stuck down there. After that morning, we started making our lunches before going to bed, and avoided the basement altogether. About a year later, my brother had a friend over, and it happened again. I wasn't there to tell you that story, but now, 13 years later, it hasn't happened again. And yes, my family still lives in the house. This encounter is a little mild, but still creeped me out nonetheless. This happened to me around 11 or 12 years ago, when I was about 13 or 14. It was a weekend, and I had just finished babysitting for my aunt. My cell phone rang, and on the line was a man who sounded to be about in his mid-30s or early 40s. Right away, he called me by my name.
Is this?
I said yes, and he keeps on going on and on about how he's known me for a very long time, and he's an old friend and wanted to catch up. This guy was obviously looking for someone else with the same name, so I kindly let him know that he had got the wrong number. He responded with,
No, you just don't remember me. I'm telling you, we were friends and we could catch up.
I was young and it wasn't my nature to just hang up on someone, so it went on for about 20 minutes. Eventually I said bye, and he promised to call back later. A few hours later he did call. My aunt answered and asked to know his name. She relayed it to me. It was not a name I recognized. She hung up and I thought it was weird, but it was over. Maybe a year or so later, the man called me back. Once again he insisted that he knew me and called me by my name and asked to catch up. This time I was surrounded by friends and confidently told him to stop calling me. I never heard from him again. It still gives me shivers when I think about it.